Chapter 346. From that day onwards, the spirit snake became different. It wasn't his appearance, but his behavior. This fellow suddenly didn't want to return to the ink dragon diagram on my back and insisted on staying outside. He even said that in order to cultivate, he had wasted so much of his time. Now that he had succeeded in his cultivation, it was time to properly appreciate life. There was no reason for him to go into seclusion every day. After listening to him, I felt that what he said made sense. From the moment I found him, he had been living on that magical compass all year round. Moreover, he was buried underground, and he didn't see the light of day all day. That's why he had developed a personality that hated the dark. It made sense. Moreover, he could control the size of his body and turn into a small snake. He wouldn't cause any trouble if he stayed outside. Thus, I didn't force him and let him play outside. But very quickly I realized that something was wrong. This fellow could fly. Even if he played outside, he could keep up with our speed. However, no matter how beautiful the scenery outside was, he didn't go out to play. Moreover, when he sat in the car, he didn't move his head to the window. The scenery outside didn't attract his attention at all. On the first day of the trip to Anyang, the snake spirit stayed in the passenger seat. It hooked the sun visor above with its tail and looked at the makeup mirror above for the whole day. While looking at the mirror, it kept laughing. It sounded so creepy that Zhang Kanwen couldn't drive properly. He turned his head to look at the snake spirit from time to time. In the afternoon, the spirit snake became even worse. While he looked at himself in the mirror and laughed, he kept muttering, "Aya, whose snake is this? No, whose dragon is this? Why is he so handsome and charming? Especially the dragon horn on his head, it's really beautiful." In the past, I always heard people say that the horn is outstanding. So this is what it means. Just a small part of it is revealed and it looks so extraordinary. If it grows out in the future, how shocking will it be? Extraordinary, really extraordinary. My face turned green as I listened from the side. How could this fellow be lusting after women? He was purely trying to show off the small horn on his head, or perhaps it should be said that he was showing off his newly born flood dragon body. I angrily kicked him to the back seat. Now it was quiet. The spirit snake was upset for a while. Then it crawled to the window. It didn't look at itself in the mirror anymore. Instead, it looked at the scenery outside. It seemed it had finally been attracted by the early spring scenery. However, it didn't take long for me to realize that the spirit serpent was chuckling and muttering. I took a closer look. He wasn't looking at the scenery. He was using the reflection on the car window to look at himself in the mirror. I couldn't help but laugh. After thinking for a while, I didn't stop him. The spirit snake used to be an illusory spirit. After it had turned into a dragon, it finally had its own body. It was normal for it to be excited. I'll let him be happy for a few days. As a result, under my connivance, the spirit snake became even worse. On the second day of our trip to Anyang, the spirit snake didn't look at himself in the mirror anymore. Whenever he was free, he would come to me and Zhang Kanwen. He didn't talk, just rubbing his head against our arms and legs. At first, I didn't know what he was doing. Later on, I found that he wasn't using his head to rub against us. He was using the horn on his head. His purpose was clear. He wasn't satisfied with just praising himself. He wanted us to praise his horn, too. Zhang Kanwen and I didn't want to bother with him. Begrudgingly, the spirit snake went to look for the little zombie sitting in the back seat. The little zombie didn't have a high intellect, and he was a dull man. Of course, he didn't know how to praise people. However, the spirit snake was so shameless that it could even make an iron tree bloom. Moreover, the little zombie knew how to talk. Finally, under the tireless guidance of the snake spirit, the little zombie finally learned a few words of praise for the snake spirit. Along the way, under the snake spirit's request, he kept repeating those words over and over again, making the snake spirit so happy that he laughed wildly all the way. On the way, Jean Canwin and I bought 2 bottles of iced beer. When we were about to open the cap, the spirit snake saw us from behind. He screamed, "Stop!" Then, he dashed forward. Before we could react, he put his head next to the bottle and used the horn on his head to pry open the cap. Then, he grinned at me as if he was waiting for me to praise him. I gawked and dropped my jaw. That wasn't all. On the way back, no matter if we got in or out of the car, the spirit snake didn't give us a chance to open the door. As soon as the car stopped, he flew out of the window. Then, he used the horn on his head to grab the door handle to open the door. Jean Canwin and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Fortunately, the spirit snake didn't grow up. After we arrived in Anyang, he seemed to be bored. He hid in the ink dragon painting on my back. No matter how I called him, he didn't want to come out. I was surprised and pointed at the big mirrors on the wall. "You can come out and look at yourself." The spirit snake wasn't moved. He said, "I don't want to look at myself. I've found that even if the horn on my head is extraordinary, my body is still that of a snake. It's too ordinary. That's why I've decided to cultivate in seclusion. If I don't cultivate a human form, I won't come out." Now that he mentioned it, I remembered that, after the spirit serpent transformed into a dragon, it would have the ability to transform into a human. However, it was also a kind of divine ability, and it couldn't appear directly after transforming into a flood dragon. Instead, it would take a period of practice to gradually master and use it. I was also looking forward to seeing how the spirit snake would transform into a human. I didn't disturb him, and asked him to stay in the ink dragon painting to cultivate. Jean Canwin and I rested for a night. The next day, we took the little zombie out to explore the Inshu scenic area in Anyang. We wanted to find the location of the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty and the entrance. The hotel we stayed in was in the Indu district of Anyang, which was very close to the Inshu scenic area. We arrived shortly after we left the hotel. After buying the tickets, we skimmed through the introduction at the entrance of the scenic area. We found that the Inshu scenic area consisted of 3 parts: the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty, the ancestral temple of the Shang dynasty, and the northern canal city. Jean Canwin and I were elated. The royal tomb of the Shang dynasty was located at the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty. We identified the direction and headed north of the northern canal to the martial officer village. The royal tomb of the Shang dynasty was there. According to the introduction of the scenic area, the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty covered an area of more than 200 mu. It wasn't very big. With Jean Canwin and my abilities, we could easily find the entrance to the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty by walking around the site. In fact, it only took us 1 hour to determine the location of the entrance. Since the spring sacrifice day was still far away, we didn't hurry to check it out. Instead, we stayed in the scenic area and found a hotel with the theme of the Shang dynasty's culture that was very close to the entrance. While waiting for the spring sacrifice day to arrive, we adjusted our cultivation and prepared for the next step of entering the royal tomb of the Shang dynasty. The purpose of our trip this time was to eliminate the ancient well ghost. Needless to say, we knew how dangerous it would be. Even with the secret method passed down by Jean Canwin's sect, we didn't dare to be careless. We rested, reorganized, and prepared very seriously. 3 days later, Jean Canwin and I had almost finished our preparations. While we were idling in the hotel, we suddenly felt an extremely strong fluctuation of Tao energy. This fluctuation of Tao energy wasn't much weaker than my cultivation. Moreover, it felt familiar. While I was frowning, Jean Canwin also felt it. He suggested that we go and check it out. The 2 of us went to the lobby of the first floor of the hotel. When we looked up, we saw a familiar figure checking in. Seeing this person, I heaved a sigh of relief. However, I still had some doubts. After thinking for a while, I asked Jean Canwin to stay far away and not be impatient. I walked over and stood behind that person. I asked with a smile, Brother Han, it's a small world. Why are you here? That person was Han Wennan. When he heard my voice, he turned around with a surprised face. However, he didn't hurry to explain to me. After checking in, he walked to the chair next to me and sat down. Although the Han family has the true dragon vein in Shenzhen, because of the Shang dynasty's sacrificial altar and the well ghost, they didn't dare to send people there. They only sent 2 elders to monitor the well ghost and think of a solution. Yesterday, the well ghost suddenly got up and left the sacrificial altar, heading north. The Han family didn't dare to neglect it, so they sent Han Wennan to follow the well ghost's aura and come here. After explaining, he told me that the Han family's elders would come here soon. He asked me to be careful and not be discovered. Although I already knew Han Wennan's attitude towards me, I was still glad to hear his reminder. However, the news of the Han family's celestial master's arrival made me anxious. Speaking of which, the Han family's goal was the same as mine. We both wanted to kill the well ghost. However, I understood that the Han family's celestial master would never cooperate with me. After all, they belonged to the Metaphysics Society. The reason why they could occupy the true dragon vein in Shenzhen was related to the Metaphysics Society. They wouldn't ignore the Metaphysics Society's order to kill them and work with me. On the contrary, if Zhang Canwen acted alone, he might be able to cooperate with the Han family. Zhang Canwen only had a grudge against the Liu family. He didn't have any conflict with the Han family or the Metaphysics Society. However, the metaphysics world was a world where the strong preyed on the weak. Not only did the Liu family know about Wen Shan's great change, but the Han family also knew about it. If Zhang Canwen rashly cooperated with them, it was hard to say if the Han family wouldn't have any ulterior motives. After all, Wen Shan's origin wasn't ordinary. If the Liu family could find out that Wen Shan's inheritance wasn't ordinary, the Han family, who was even more powerful, should know about it. Chapter 347. When I returned to my room, Zhang Canwen was already waiting for me. After hearing the news I brought back, Zhang Canwen frowned slightly before nodding. It's not strange that the Han family chased us all the way here. However, there's really no need to cooperate. Let the Han family do whatever they want to do. We don't need their help to do what we want to do. We can do it ourselves. He said it lightly, but I wasn't as calm. I shook my head. Their target is also the Jing ghost. After entering the royal tomb ruins, it's very likely that we'll meet. Whether or not we can deal with the Jing ghost is another matter. The Han family's celestial master definitely won't be polite to us. It's true that we don't need their help, but we can't let them block our way. Hearing what I said, Zhang Canwen didn't care at all. He revealed a mysterious smile. Don't worry, they won't block our way. I frowned. I didn't understand. Zhang Canwen was a little too confident. Although he had the Song of Righteousness and temporarily obtained the Celestial Master's power, there was still a gap between him and a real Celestial Master. Just as I was puzzled, Zhang Canwen smiled and explained, there are many mysterious places in the Yinshang royal tomb. Moreover, it can isolate spiritual senses. Even a Celestial Master in the realm of Celestial Master is like a mortal in there. Dao Qi can't go too far away from the body. As long as we avoid their line of sight, the Han family's Celestial Master won't be able to find us. Moreover, there are some dangerous places in the royal tomb that even a Celestial Master might not be able to avoid. When the time comes, even if the Han family's Celestial Master finds us, it's hard to say if he will have the energy to make a move. I was pleasantly surprised. So there was such a secret in the Yinshang royal tomb. I was relieved. The Han family's Celestial Master only followed the Jing ghost here. He definitely wouldn't know much about the Yinshang royal tomb. On Zhang Canwen's side, since Wenshan's lineage had left behind a method to deal with the Jing ghost, he would naturally leave behind various records in the Yinshang royal tomb. Since that was the case, there was no need to worry about the Han family. Just like what Zhang Kanwen said, we just had to focus on our own matters. Originally, I wanted to wait for Zhang Kanwen to make up his mind before informing Han Wennan. However, since Zhang Kanwen didn't have any intention of cooperating with me, I didn't go to look for him. Instead, I stayed in my room and meditated. I didn't know when the heavenly master of the Han family would come. To avoid danger, I didn't go out for the next few days. I stayed in my room and tried to refine the large amount of qi I had absorbed earlier. At this moment, my cultivation had stabilized at glorious knowledge 4-star realm. I still had leftover shaman energy from the Tai Sui corpse. Based on my estimations, once I refined the shaman energy, I might reach glorious knowledge 5-star realm. There seemed to be only a slight difference between 4 stars and 5 stars, but in reality, once one reached 5 stars of glorious memory, they would officially have glorious memory late-stage cultivation. It was not something that 4 stars of glorious memory could compare to. 3 days later, more than half of the shaman energy in my body had been digested and I was getting closer and closer to the glorious consciousness later stage. Just at that moment, a knock on the door interrupted my cultivation. I was slightly displeased. I used my spiritual sense to check outside the door. After realizing that it was Han Wennan, I stopped refining my shaman energy and stood up. I opened the door and welcomed Han Wennan in. The moment I entered, Han Wennan didn't wait for me to speak and quickly said to me, "Zhou-yi, my second uncle and fourth uncle are already here. They are staying next to me. You have to be careful for the next few days. Don't expose yourself. The heavenly master of the Han family is already here?" I looked at Han Wennan and felt touched. I quickly nodded. "Thank you, Big Brother Han. I will be careful." Han Wennan heaved a sigh of relief after getting my guarantee. However, he quickly sighed. "My Han family came here to eliminate the well ghost. Actually, you don't have to participate in this mess at all. My Han family can do it for you. Even if my Han family can't handle it, there's still Zhang Kanwen. Zhou-yi, forgive me for speaking bluntly. There's no use for you to stay here. You have to risk being discovered by my Han family's heavenly master at all times. It's better for you to leave." What he said was reasonable. If I hadn't listened to Zhang Kanwen's introduction of the internal situation of the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum, I would definitely have seriously considered it. However, now that I knew that the Heavenly Master couldn't do anything to me after entering the Royal Mausoleum, I naturally didn't have the slightest bit of fear. Moreover, I really wanted to see the well ghost again to understand why he had touched my cheek so strangely. I once again expressed my gratitude to Han Wennan, but I didn't mention a single word about him leaving. As for the situation within the royal tomb, it involved the secrets of Zhang Kanwen's sect. I thought about it, but in the end I didn't tell him. After leaving with Han Wennan, I went to close the door. Just as I was about to return to continue cultivating, there was another knock on the door. I was stunned. I thought that Han Wennan had forgotten something and had returned. I didn't pay much attention to it, but subconsciously used my spiritual sense to look outside. The result shocked me. I couldn't see anything outside. In such a situation, it was either that the person outside was wary of me and could hide, or that their cultivation was much higher than mine and I wouldn't be able to discover them. However, only Zhang Kanwen and Han Wennan knew that I was here. Although Zhang Kanwen's cultivation was higher than mine, it wasn't so high that I couldn't discover him. As for Han Wennan's cultivation, it was needless to mention that I had been suppressing him. If it wasn't the two of them, who else could it be? My heart raced. The worst-case scenario was that the Han family's heavenly master had secretly followed Han Wennan to this place. Thinking of this, I didn't dare to open the door. I looked around, gritted my teeth, and ran to the window. I was prepared to jump out of the window and escape. However, before I could take action, there was a sudden sound from the room's door. It was pushed open by someone. I was even more alarmed. Just as I was about to risk my life, I saw the person who had entered and was stunned on the spot. "Aya, long time no see. How have you been?" A lazy figure asked me as he slowly walked in. When he reached me, he sat on the sofa and didn't look at me. He looked tired as he stretched his body. He looked very relaxed, as if he had returned to his own home. I couldn't help but smile. How could I still have the thought of escaping? I walked next to him and sat down. I turned to look at him, suppressing the excitement in my heart. "Nangong, you've finally appeared. How's Yi Piampian now? And where's the fatty? Yi Piampian? Are they all right?" Nangong waved his hand impatiently. "They're all right. Yi Piampian has a high position in the Metaphysics Association. They wouldn't want to harm her. Your fatty friend will be in charge of the Tao of Divination in the future. My cheap senior brother, Zhenren Guan, won't allow the Metaphysics Association to do anything to him. Don't worry. As for you, how's Tao Wu? Hee, the taste of the night isn't bad, right?" As he spoke, he smiled vulgarly. When I heard what he said, I was shocked. Nangong knows Tao Wu? But when I asked Red Shadow in the Fire God Temple, she didn't know who Nangong was. How could this be? I had a strong doubt and couldn't help but ask Nangong about the secret. Nangong was stunned. The smile on his face disappeared and he spread his hands. "This matter. I can't tell you for the time being. Tao Wu also knows me, but he doesn't know my current identity." After he said that, I understood that the name Nangong was probably an alias. This topic made us both silent. We didn't speak for a long time. I couldn't help but think of Red Shadow. Back then, I had promised her that I would go back at least once every 6 months. Calculating the time, it had been almost half a year since I last came out. After I dealt with the Jing ghost, I would go to the Fire God Temple again. Just as I made up my mind, Nangong suddenly said to me, "This time, I'll go with you to the Yinshang royal tomb. Also, you have to be careful of Han Wennan. There's something wrong with this person." When I wanted to ask him why he wanted to go with us to the Yinshang royal tomb, I was stunned when I heard his last sentence. What did he say? There was something wrong with Han Wennan? Chapter 348. The first thought that popped into my mind was, "That's impossible. How could there be a problem with Han Wennan? Back in the cave in Shenzhen, he didn't want to fight me the first time we met. He didn't kill me even after being pressured by the heavenly master of the Han family. After that, he cooperated with me to deal with the Jingui. When we arrived in Anyang, he even took the initiative to tell me about the heavenly master of the Han family's whereabouts. He told me to be careful. If he wanted to harm me, why would he do all that? If he had secretly informed the Metaphysics Society of my address, I would have perished long ago. He wouldn't have needed to waste so much effort." After thinking for a while, I shook my head and asked Nangong, "What do you mean? What's wrong with Han Wennan?" Nangong stood up from the sofa and spread his hands. He answered irresponsibly, "I don't know. It's just a feeling. Anyway, just be careful. Oh yeah, Yi Piampian asked me to bring you something. Here." Then, he took out a cyan handkerchief from his pocket and threw it at me. I was stunned and subconsciously caught it. I lowered my head and smelled a delicate fragrance. I seemed to see that cold and tall figure again. While I was in a daze, Nangong's voice came again. "Tsk. Bian gave a handkerchief, and Yi Piampian also gave a handkerchief. You're really lucky." Haha, as he said that, he stretched and left my room. Before he left, he told me that he lived next door, and that I should look for him if I needed anything. I didn't pay any attention to him. My eyes were glued to the dark blue handkerchief in my hand. After Nangong had left for a long time, I opened the handkerchief and saw a sentence embroidered on it with white silk thread. "I only hope that your heart is like mine." I frowned and kept silent for a long time. Then, I folded the handkerchief and put it in my pocket. I returned to my bed and sat cross-legged. I steadied my mind and continued to digest the witchcraft energy in my body. But this time, no matter how hard I tried, my cultivation progress was extremely slow. There was an indescribable annoyance in my heart. I might as well stop cultivating and lay down on the bed, preparing to sleep. I closed my eyes and lay there for 4 hours, but I didn't feel sleepy at all. Late at night, I couldn't help but open my eyes. I smiled bitterly and said, "I only wish that your heart is like mine. I only wish that your heart is like mine. I only wish that your heart is like mine. I definitely won't let you down. Why bother?" It was a quiet night. Early the next morning, I went next door to find Nangong and asked about Yi Piampian's situation. I learned that she was currently on a small island in Penglai, Yantai, Shandong Province. This small island was a secret area of the Metaphysics Society. Normally, it didn't communicate with the outside world. After he said that, I remembered that I had asked Yang Kaichen to help me find information about Yi Piampian. I learned that she was imprisoned by the Metaphysical Society. Moreover, he said that very few people could escape from that place. With that in mind, I quickly asked Nangong for confirmation. Nangong shook his head. "It's not really a prison. That place is extremely important to the Metaphysics Association. The people who guard there are isolated from the rest of the world. Very few of them can come out. Yi Piampian has already been arranged to go there. It has nothing to do with you. Even without you, she would have gone there sooner or later." After listening to his words, I was even more confused. However, I vaguely remembered the place where the Metaphysics Association kept the true dragon vein. The people there were also isolated from the rest of the world. Could it be that Yi Piampian had gone to a secret place like the true dragon vein? I asked Nangong again, but he didn't want to talk about it this time. He just said that the small island Yi Piampian was on was much more important than the true dragon vein. It was the foundation of the Metaphysics Association. If I wanted Yi Piampian to come out or to save her, I didn't need to ask now. When I reached the Heavenly Master Realm, I would know everything. His words were so confusing that I didn't understand him at all. However, when I asked him again and again, he didn't say anything. I had no choice but to bury it in my heart for the time being. Burying it in my heart didn't mean forgetting it. Although Nangong said that Yi Piampian's place had nothing to do with me, I didn't think so. After saving me, she was immediately imprisoned. How could it have nothing to do with me? Moreover, Yi Piampian had given me this handkerchief. I didn't know the relationship between me and Yi Piampian, but I wouldn't abandon her when she was in danger. Sooner or later, I would go to Penglai to find her whereabouts. Of course, the premise was that I had to reach the Heavenly Master Realm, just like Nangong had said. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the energy to take care of others when I couldn't even guarantee my own safety. Putting this matter aside, I asked Nangong why he wanted to go to the mausoleum of the Shang dynasty. Yesterday, when he mentioned Han Wennan and Yi Piampian, I was flustered and didn't ask further. But now I had to get to the bottom of it. After all, I was just accompanying Zhang Kanwen to the mausoleum of the Shang dynasty. Nangong's background was mysterious, and his behavior was unpredictable. I couldn't let him ruin Zhang Kanwen's plan. Nangong hesitated for a while, then told me that he wanted to go to the mausoleum to find something. I felt relieved. As long as his purpose didn't conflict with Zhang Kanwen's, it wouldn't be a big deal. After leaving Nangong's place, I went to find Zhang Kanwen and told him about Nangong's trip. Zhang Kanwen didn't know who Nangong was, but he trusted me a lot. He didn't ask anything and nodded in agreement. After everything was settled, the next day was the last day of the second lunar month. We also chose that day to depart. The mausoleum of the Shang dynasty wasn't big, but it wasn't easy to find the place for the spring sacrifice. We had to stay for 1 day to search for it. Before leaving, I contacted Han Wennan and confirmed that the Han family wouldn't enter the mausoleum until the first day of the third lunar month. Then I felt at ease. At noon, I took Xiao Jin to the mountainous area in the outskirts of the city. I found a place where no one was around and let Xiao Jin hide there. It wasn't convenient to bring Xiao Jin along. Moreover, the day of the spring sacrifice would conflict with the day of Xiao Jin's transformation. It was better to let him stay outside. After settling Xiao Jin down, I told him several times not to run around and to wait for me. When Xiao Jin became impatient, I left alone. When I returned to the hotel, it was around dusk. We met up with the others. After confirming that the workers at the Inshu royal tomb had left, Zhang Kanwan, Nangong, and the little zombie carried some food and water. We quietly sneaked into the area. I had checked the entrance a few days ago. After entering the scenic area, we went to the entrance as if we were familiar with it. Along the way, there were many security cameras and guards. However, with our cultivation base, we didn't leave any traces behind. We smoothly arrived at the entrance of the main hall. We easily opened the safety door of the main hall. After we entered, we saw a deep pit. This pit was an excavated mausoleum. According to the records, the world-famous Queen Mother Wu cauldron had been unearthed from this pit. There was a staircase next to the grave pit. We quietly climbed the stairs and reached the bottom of the pit. Soon, we found a big hole on each side of the pit. The hole was strangely deep. Even with my eyesight, I could only see darkness. It seemed that this hole was really deep. At this time, it was already the season of spring, but after nightfall, the weather was still very cold, and the temperature in the grave pit was even lower, especially when walking towards the dark hole cave, the temperature plummeted. By the time they reached the cave entrance, the temperature was almost below zero. Although there was no turbulent airflow, standing at the entrance made people feel as if a cold wind was blowing, which made the atmosphere even more frightening. If an ordinary person were to come here, just the temperature alone would be enough to make them tremble in fear. However, our group of people all have extraordinary cultivation, so we naturally wouldn't care about this trace of coldness. We didn't even prepare any equipment at all. We only raised a flashlight and directly stepped into the cave to explore ahead. After a few steps, the temperature rose a little bit. However, it became darker. When we turned around, we couldn't see the entrance anymore. After walking through a hole that was obviously dug later, we saw a spacious cave. There was nothing in the cave except for some long stones that looked like stone sculptures. They seemed to be supporting us. On the other side there were a few forks. I wanted to turn around and ask Zhang Kanwan which direction to go, but Nangong grinned and walked forward. He seemed to be very familiar with this place. He pointed at the forks on the left. While walking, he said to me, "If you want to find the place of the spring sacrifice, follow this path. I want to find something, but I'm not going the same way as you. We should part ways here." Chapter 349. Although I knew that Nangong had always been secretive, I was still surprised that he was so familiar with the mausoleum. I stared at his back in a daze and didn't say anything for a long time. Not only me, but Zhang Kanwan was also stunned by Nangong. After a while, he frowned and asked me, "Your friend, is he familiar with this place?" I shook my head and smiled wryly. "I'm not sure, but he's walking a different path. Whether he's familiar or not, it doesn't have much to do with us." Zhang Kanwan took his master's order very seriously. Although he didn't say it out loud, I knew that the Han family's sudden addition had put a lot of pressure on him. Now that Nangong, who seemed to be very familiar with the mausoleum, had suddenly appeared, it was inevitable that he would overthink things. What I said was also a bit of an explanation. Zhang Kanwan nodded, accepting my explanation. He lifted his feet and walked to the leftmost fork. I brought the little zombie and followed behind him. As we walked, I thought about Nangong's purpose for coming here. This guy had purposely approached me before I started learning Taoism. Every time he appeared, he either saved me or advised me to practice witchcraft energy. I already knew that he was most likely the remnant of the witch tribe, that the Metaphysics Society had mentioned. Moreover, he was different from me. I had only started practicing Taoism halfway, but he was most likely a true witch tribe. Could it be that his visit to the mausoleum was related to his identity as a witch tribe member? While I was making wild guesses, I quickly followed Zhang Canwen and entered the depths of the fork. This fork deviated to the left. After walking for about 30 meters, the narrow and low tunnel suddenly disappeared, and the surroundings became open. The flashlight in my hand could only illuminate the surroundings. However, with my strong eyesight, I could clearly see the surroundings in the darkness. This was a large hall that was more than 10 meters wide. Compared to the simple cave outside the tunnel, this hall was much bigger, and more importantly, more exquisite. There were more than 10 long stone carvings erected around the hall. On top of them were some human figures. Although I couldn't see them clearly in the darkness, it didn't stop me from feeling their exquisiteness. In addition, there were all kinds of tables, chairs, boxes, and cabinets in the hall. They were all carved from stone and looked simple and heavy. The outside of them was carved with fine patterns. Although a small part of them was broken, most of them were well preserved. I clicked my tongue in admiration. If these were artifacts from the Shang dynasty, they had been preserved for 3,000 to 4,000 years. I wondered what kind of material these stones were made of. They were so durable. While I was observing the surrounding scenery, Zhang Canwen also stopped in his tracks. He didn't look around randomly like I did. Instead, his gaze was fixed in front of him. His eyes flickered with light. It was obvious that he was calculating something. I followed his gaze and realized that there were a few more tunnels in front of us. It was obvious that he was looking for the path to the spring offering ground. I couldn't help him with this matter, so I simply walked to the nearest artifact and observed it. It was an item that looked like a chest in the future. It was made of stone, and the outside was carved with complicated patterns. There was a piece of paper on the top. I looked at it and saw that it was written in modern, simplified Chinese characters. It said, Shang Dynasty Stone Carving Suitcase number 376. I was bewildered for a while before I reacted. This place should have been excavated by archaeologists. Perhaps it was inconvenient to move these stone carvings, or they weren't easy to preserve after they were taken out. I opened the suitcase, which was empty. However, there was a fingernail-sized shell lying quietly in the rightmost corner. I picked it up and played with it. While I was bored and was about to check the next stone carving, Zhang Canwen finally stopped pondering. He pointed at the second tunnel from the left and said, "It should be this way. Let's go." I hurried to follow him with the little zombie. After a few steps into the tunnel, a stone wall appeared in front of us. It was a dead end. I wanted to ask Zhang Canwen if he had taken us the wrong way, but he took the lead and said, "Zhou-yi, hold my hand." I was bewildered. Before I could react, Zhang Canwen had already turned around. He held the little zombie with his left hand and extended his right hand to me. He explained, "This isn't a dead end. It's a mechanism. If we want to pass, we have to use a secret technique. Hold me. I'll take you two over." I understood what he meant. I awkwardly grabbed his arm. Then, Zhang Canwen's mouth moved slightly and he chanted a few words. Then, I saw something the size of a book appear in front of his chest. Through his clothes, I could see a strong golden light. The golden light only appeared for about 5 seconds before it suddenly disappeared. It seemed to merge with Zhang Canwen's body. At the same time, Zhang Canwen's aura suddenly changed. The unique aura of a heavenly master that he had when he was facing Lu Chengyi appeared again. I suddenly reacted. Zhang Canwen had used the power of the Song of Righteousness to temporarily enter the heavenly master's realm. I couldn't help but raise my head to look at the stone wall in front of me. What kind of mechanism is this? It requires a heavenly master's realm to pass through? While I was thinking, Zhang Canwen grabbed me and the little zombie. He stomped his feet on the ground and leaped up. Although this tunnel was much larger than when we had entered from the outside, it was only about 3 meters high. If Zhang Canwen jumped like that, his head would definitely hit the mountain wall. Not only him, but me and the little zombie would also suffer. However, I didn't have time to resist as my body was lifted up by him. Zhang Canwen's current heavenly master power didn't allow me to resist at all. Just as I was about to scream, I didn't feel my head hit the mountain wall. I only felt as if I had hit a thin film. Then, my body kept flying up. I hastily looked around and realized that I was in a spacious space without a single ray of light. With my cultivation base, I could roughly see that this was an extremely spacious space. It was even more spacious than the underground hall in Shenzhen, which was around 100 meters wide. Zhang Canwen finally stopped his upward movement. He steadied his body in the air and slowly descended. After falling for dozens of meters, my feet shook and I finally felt the ground. After landing, Zhang Canwen panted heavily. He hurriedly told me, "Protect me. I need to adjust my breathing for a while." Then, he sat down cross-legged and suppressed his panting. He used his Taoist energy to adjust his body. After all, he had relied on the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness to enter the Heavenly Master's realm. It wasn't his own power. Just now, he had flown with the little zombie and me. I guessed that his Taoist energy had been used up. The inside of the Shang dynasty's royal tomb was mysterious and strange. I didn't dare to be negligent. I asked the little zombie to guard the right side of Zhang Canwen's body while I guarded the left side. I also sat down cross-legged and mobilized the Taoist energy in my body, paying close attention to the surrounding situation. The surroundings were very quiet. This kind of silence was difficult to experience in the outside world. It was a kind of absolute silence without a trace of sound. In the beginning, this silence was very comfortable, but after more than 10 minutes, this silence made people frown. This was because in this absolute silence, the sound of one's breathing and even heartbeat could be clearly transmitted to one's ears, causing an inexplicable sense of panic in one's heart. After an hour, besides the sound of breathing and heartbeat, there was another sound. I couldn't tell what it was. It was just a meaningless noise. At first, it was very subtle. However, as time passed, it became louder and louder until it sounded like thunder. At this moment, I heard this kind of sound. However, I was clear-headed enough to realize that it wasn't really a sound. It was similar to tinnitus, a sound that people imagined out of thin air. I frowned and mobilized the Taoist energy in my body to circulate around my body. It was easy to expel this kind of non-existent sound. Just as I was about to turn around to check on Zhang Canwen's condition, I suddenly felt my palm heat up. I lowered my head and saw that it was the small shell that I had played with outside the hall. Why is this shell heating up? I was stunned. I remembered that when I had used my Taoist energy to circulate around my body, my Taoist energy seemed to have touched the shell. With that thought, I quickly mobilized my Taoist energy and directed it towards the shell. As expected, the shell heated up again. Chapter 350. I frowned. The first thought that popped up in my head was Nangong. No wonder he suddenly appeared and insisted on coming with me. It was most likely related to the connection between the shell and the shaman energy. Moreover, I recalled that in the cave where we had found the well ghost in Shenzhen, when Tianxiang had wanted to create the dragon vein 1,000 years ago, he had used the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ritual. I didn't think much about it when I was in Shenzhen. However, now that I thought about it, Prime Minister Wen didn't hesitate to summon the soul of the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ritual to create the dragon vein. He had even hastily built such a big cave. From this, it was easy to guess that Prime Minister Wen had no other choice. In other words, the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ritual was the only way to create the dragon vein. I lowered my head to look at the shell in my hand. I suddenly understood. The method to create the dragon vein was the conversion between shaman energy and Taoist energy. If the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ritual was the only method, It was possible that the battle between shaman energy and Taoist energy had started in the Shang dynasty. It was also possible that one of them had appeared in the world for the first time in the Shang dynasty. Moreover, it wasn't hard to guess the details. After all, the sacrificial ritual in the cave in Shenzhen had turned the Tai Sui into the true dragon vein. In other words, it had turned the shaman energy into Taoist energy. From this, I could boldly guess that Taoist energy had appeared in the Shang dynasty, and it had been transformed from shaman energy. This conclusion didn't shock me too much. In fact, when I had witnessed the ceremony to turn the Tai Sui into the true dragon vein, I had thought about the relationship between the two. However, I was in a dangerous situation at that time, so I didn't have time to think about it. Now that I saw the shell respond to the shaman energy, my thoughts came back to me. The Tai Sui was born from the Sui star. It had existed in this world for an unknown period of time. Every time the Sui star appeared in the sky, it meant that the Tai Sui had died. After thousands of years, I didn't know how many corpses of the Tai Sui had accumulated. If the Shang dynasty had the method to turn the Tai Sui's corpse into the true dragon vein, who knew if all the true dragon veins in this world had the same method? The more I thought about it, the more shocked I became. If that was the truth, then there seemed to be a reason for the battle of witchcraft. Witchcraft energy came from the corpse of the Tai Sui. Just like how I had only cultivated beside the corpse of the Tai Sui in the cave in Shenzhen twice, I had leveled up from 1 star to 4 star. With the help of the corpse of the Tai Sui, it would be too easy for people who cultivated witchcraft energy to level up. Similarly, those who cultivated Tao energy were unable to absorb heaven and earth yuan qi at the beginning of their cultivation, so the only way to increase their Tao energy was through the true dragon vein. At the end of the day, the battle of the shaman Tao was merely a fight for cultivation resources. Over the past tens of millions of years, there might have been a lot of corpses of Tai Sui, but no matter how many there was still a limit to how many there were. So many years had passed, and while a new corpse of Tai Sui would be born every few years, it would never be able to compare to the speed at which they were consumed. As cultivation resources became more scarce, the battle between shamans would definitely become more intense. It was no wonder that the people from the Metaphysics Association would say things like, "Everyone has the right to kill the shamans." During the Middle Ages, the battle of beliefs in the West could cause rivers of blood to flow, and it lasted for more than 200 years without stopping. The battle for resources was even crueler than the battle for belief. If you had more resources, I would have less resources. It was a battle of life and death. One could imagine how cruel it was. Based on what I've seen in the metaphysics world over the years, the people who cultivated sorcerer qi, the shamans, were probably killed by the people who cultivated Tao energy a long time ago. Otherwise, there would have been news about the shamans in the metaphysics world. Speaking of which, it's quite sad. There was originally no Tao energy in the world, and Tao energy was only transformed from sorcerer qi. In the end, Tao energy won and almost destroyed sorcerer qi. This situation doesn't sound normal at all. What exactly happened in the history of annihilation? Until now, perhaps only Nangong knows. However, there is one thing I don't understand. Although the regeneration rate of cultivation resources is very low, every few years, there will be 4 stars in the sky. The newly born Tai Sui's corpses are the only source of cultivation resources. The shamans are almost extinct, so most of the Tai Sui's corpses must have been obtained by the people who cultivated Tao energy. However, 1,000 years ago, Prime Minister Wen, a famous person, had to go through a lot of trouble to transform a Tai Sui's corpse into a true dragon's vein. Now, after the people who cultivated Tao energy obtained the Tai Sui's corpse, do they still have the ability to transform it into a true dragon's vein? I couldn't help but remember the heavenly Tao corpse of the corpse insect and the power of the 9 spirits in the Grand Palace that Azan had mentioned. Are those Tai Sui's corpses the newly born Tai Sui's corpses in the recent hundreds or even thousands of years? The power of the Tai Sui's corpses was undoubtedly sorcerer chi. If the corpses hadn't been transformed into true dragon's vein, sects like the Corpse Een sect and the Grand Palace of Thailand that relied on Tai Sui's corpses to cultivate should be the shamans. However, the people of the metaphysics world all knew about the Corpse Een sect and the Grand Palace. Why didn't they kill them all? Thinking about it, cultivation resources were never enough. The people of the metaphysics world also knew that the Tai Sui's corpses could be transformed into true dragon's veins. They wouldn't ignore the newly born Tai Sui's corpses. However, if the newly born Tai Sui's corpses had been transformed into true dragon's veins, who or what force was controlling this process? My mind was filled with these thoughts, and I couldn't sort them out even after a long time. I didn't want to think about it anymore. I shone the light from the flashlight on the shell in my hand and carefully examined it. This shell looked ordinary, but I could tell that it had some thoughts from its inner surface. There were some shallow and messy patterns on the outer surface. It didn't look different from the most ordinary shells I had seen in the past. Right when I was about to put the shell away, I suddenly remembered the blazing stones I had obtained from the Metaphysics Society. At that time, I had obtained 10 pieces of blazing stones. When put together, they formed the word life in the Fire God Temple's stone tablet. At that time, I didn't understand its meaning. It wasn't until the day of the solar eclipse when Nangong and Yi Piampian saved me that I felt the word life on the blazing stones emit a dazzling light. After that, I carefully examined the 10 pieces of blazing stones. However, from then on, the word life on the blazing stones dimmed a lot. There was only a very shallow mark left, as if it didn't exist at all. At that time, I had a guess that the word life contained some kind of power. However, after I was sent to the Fire God Temple from the capital, the power on it had been used up. That was why I didn't pay much attention to the blazing stones. The reason why I remembered the word life was because of the light patterns on the shell. They looked very similar to the life character on the blazing stones. I quickly took out the remaining blazing stones and compared them to the light from the flashlight. I found that they were exactly the same. This discovery caused me to sink into another mystery. Grandpa Li was a core member of the Metaphysics Association. One could imagine his position in the battle of witchcraft. However, not only did he not make a move at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Association, the blazing stones that saved my life were most likely sent to me by him. Why was that? Also, Yi Piampian and Yi Maolan looked exactly the same. It was impossible that they weren't related. However, one of them was in the Metaphysics Association while the other was with Nangong. Was Grandpa Li a friend or a foe? What was his attitude towards the witches? Just as I was lost in my thoughts, I suddenly heard a cough. I quickly turned around and saw that Zhang Kanwen had woken up from his meditation. Temporarily suppressing my chaotic thoughts, I whispered to Zhang Kanwen, "How are you feeling? Do you feel better?" Zhang Kanwen's complexion was much rosier. He nodded. "I used too much Tao energy. I've recovered." As soon as he said that, he stood up and looked around in the endless darkness. He smiled. "We've finally entered the real Yinshang Royal Mausoleum." I frowned. "The real Yinshang Royal Mausoleum?" Zhang Kanwen nodded and smiled. "That's right. The Yinshang Royal Mausoleum in Yinshu has a circumference of 200 miles. It's just a small part of the periphery. The Shang dynasty was the dynasty that unified China. How could the royal mausoleum only cover such a small area? I suddenly understood. No wonder there was a stone wall in front of us when we reached the end of the tunnel. It turned out that there was a world inside. Thinking back to the method that Zhang Kanwen had used to bring me in, I was afraid that not many people in the metaphysics world could see through the mystery and enter this place, let alone the scientific researchers. Just as I was about to ask Zhang Kanwen about the next step of his plan, Zhang Canwen's expression suddenly changed. He frowned and said, "Someone's coming in. Let's hide." Chapter 351. Zhang Canwen had said that the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum was naturally shielded from psychic senses. In addition, it was absolutely dark. If we squatted on the ground casually, we wouldn't have to worry about being discovered. As for the people who followed us in, I had a rough idea. They were most likely from the Han family. Although the Han family did not know this place as well as Zhang Canwen, since Zhang Canwen was able to enter, it was only normal for the Han family's celestial master to find some clues and barge in. That's why I didn't feel strange at all. I just wanted to hide there and wait for the Han family's heavenly master to leave. Then we could move on our own. However, when I saw who it was, I was stunned. He wasn't from the Han family at all. The person who came in also held a strong flashlight in his hand. In this pitch-black environment, the light was exceptionally clear. Although the figures behind the bright light were dim, I could still see their faces clearly with my eyesight. There were a total of 6 people in this group, and all of them were dressed in Taoist robes. They were 6 Taoist priests. Furthermore, from the Taoist robes, it was obvious that these Taoist priests were from Mount Longhu's Celestial Master sect. Taoism's attire was very particular. In the Scripture of Righteous Tao, the 3 caves Buddhist attire precepts, it was stated, one who has just entered Taoism wears a flat crown and yellow cape. 2 who have just entered Taoism wears a lotus crown. 3 who have just entered Taoism wears a yellow crown. 3 who have just entered Taoism wears a yellow crown. 3 who have just entered Taoism wears a yellow crown. 4 who have just entered Taoism wears a green crown. 5 who have just entered Taoism wears a yellow crown. 6 who have just entered Taoism wears a brown cape with purple muslin inside, wears a flying blue skirt, and wears a lotus crown. 7 who have just entered the 3 caves wears a robe of the upper clear lineage, with 9 colors added to it, looks like 5 colored clouds, wears a mountain and river robe, and wears a primeval crown. Knowing that there are heavenly men and heavenly women, jade boys and jade girls to serve and protect you, you must not be rude. The heavens revere you, the demons are restrained, you are encouraged. This paragraph was the dress code of the Taoist of the Celestial Master sect. Among them, those who had just entered the Taoist sect were ordinary people, and from the 2nd rank onwards, those who wore a lotus crown and a yellow dress were similar to the Earth Master Dragon seeking realm in metaphysics. So on and so forth. The 4th rank Taoist was the Glorious Knowledge realm, which was the early stage of glorious knowledge, and the 5th rank Profound Insight realm was the middle stage of glorious knowledge. Back then, Qin Yangting, the hall master of the mysterious altar hall of Mount Longhu, was a 5th rank Profound Insight Taoist. All the way to the 7th rank of a 3 holes lecturer was the Heavenly Master realm. He was dressed in the robes of the prime clear lineage, with 9 colors added to it. He wore a primordial crown, and his sleeves were embroidered with mountains and rivers. He wore a pair of lion head boots, and held an ivory jade tablet in his hand. Of the 6 Taoists who entered, 3 of them were dressed like this. The remaining 3 were also grade 6 Taoists wearing purple dresses and lotus crowns. 3 celestial masters from the Celestial Masters sect came all of a sudden, and all 3 of them were at the late stage of glorious memory. I was inwardly shocked. I turned to look at Zhang Canwen and saw that he also had a shocked expression. His brows were tightly furrowed. It was obvious that he didn't know what was going on either. We came here with the Han family for the sake of the well ghost, but what does this have to do with Mount Longhu? Why did they interfere? Could it be that Qin Yangting had informed Mount Longhu about what happened in Shenzhen before he died? If that was the case, Mount Longhu would have gone straight to Shenzhen or the Han family. Why would they come here? Moreover, these 6 Taoists were all wearing Taoist robes, which was strange. Although the Heavenly Master sect was particular about their attire, they would only wear it during important ceremonies. Usually, no matter if they were grade 1 Taoists or grade 7 Heavenly Master Taoists, they would wear Taoist attire such as a silk robe, 5 mountains crown, and cloud socks and 10 square shoes. There was no reason for them to wear Taoist attire to stroll around. What did they want to do here? Soon, 3 of the 6 Taoists from Mount Longhu sat down cross-legged with haggard faces. They began to meditate and adjust their breathing. It seemed they had consumed a lot of energy when they had just entered this place. As for the other 3 Taoist priests in the later stage of glorious consciousness realm, they stood guard beside the 3 Taoist priests. While protecting them, they raised the strong flashlights in their hands and scanned the surrounding terrain. They were quite far from us, so I could see clearly with the help of their flashlights. That was why I wasn't worried that they would see us. However, if the 3 Taoists woke up, it would be troublesome since we were so close to them. I turned to Zhang Kanwen and gestured for him to retreat. Zhang Kanwen nodded and agreed with me. I called the little zombie, and the 3 of us quietly retreated. We didn't talk along the way. Zhang Kanwen chose a direction and used his clothes to wrap the flashlight. With the help of the dim light, he led us forward. After walking for about 500 meters, a row of square stones appeared in front of us. Each stone was 2 meters square, and they were arranged in a straight line. Zhang Kanwen pointed at the back of the stones, and then quickly led us to hide behind the stones. After hiding behind the stones, I craned my neck to look at the Taoists from Mount Longhu. This time, I could only see a blurry mass of light. I couldn't see the people inside it. This place was safe enough, and we didn't need to worry that the Taoists would hear us. I hurried to ask Zhang Kanwen, why did the people from Mount Longhu come here? Zhang Kanwen shook his head. It can't be because of the well ghost. It seems that we made a mistake. I'm afraid that something else will happen during the spring sacrifice day in the royal tomb. I nodded. If Mount Longhu had such a big formation, it was obvious that something important had happened. It was already troublesome enough that the Han family was involved. Now that Mount Longhu had come, I was afraid that our operation wouldn't be smooth. After a moment of silence, I asked Zhang Kanwen, what should we do next? Should we go and find the well ghost? Zhang Kanwen hesitated for a while, then shook his head. The well ghost will eventually go to the spring sacrifice day. The Han family's target is also there. I'm afraid that the Taoists from Mount Longhu will also go there. If we go there first, we'll be easily discovered. Why don't we hide here and see what's going on? This place is the only way to the spring sacrifice day. Perhaps we can hear some useful information when they pass by. He had made his decision, so I didn't have any reason to object. I sat cross-legged next to the square stone and rested while watching the people from Mount Longhu. The time it took for the 3 heavenly masters to adjust their breathing was shorter than Zhang Kanwen's. Around half an hour later, they got up. Just like Zhang Kanwen had said, they walked toward us. Although I knew that the spirit consciousness couldn't leave the body in the royal tomb, when the 6 Taoists walked past me, I subconsciously held my breath. I was extremely nervous. However, the 3 heavenly masters didn't notice us. They walked forward while talking in low voices. They seemed to be very careful. Their voices were low and vague. I could only vaguely hear a few words or phrases like open, medicine, and you must get it. Then, the 6 Taoists hurried away. After the shadows around them disappeared into the darkness, I checked with Zhang Kanwen. What he had heard was similar to what I had heard. They didn't get anything valuable. After we finished our discussion, I asked Zhang Kanwen, do you want to go there now? He checked the time and hesitated for a while. It's still early for the spring sacrifice. It's best if we wait until the heavenly masters of the Han family show up. That way we can avoid everyone. I nodded and didn't say anything. Around an hour later, there was another commotion from the entrance. When the people who had just entered had finished adjusting their breathing and were walking in that direction, I finally saw them clearly. It was the Han family. However, the situation was different from what I had imagined. There were more than 10 people in the Han family's group. To be precise, it wasn't the Han family's team. It was the Metaphysics Society's team. Han Wanan was in the team, and so was the Heavenly Master of the Han family I had met last time. However, besides them and a few unfamiliar faces, the Metaphysics Society's President Gu was also there. During the solar eclipse, 6 of the 10 Heavenly Masters who had besieged me at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Society were there. One of the 6 people was the head of the Lu family, Lu Xiang. Zhang Canwen and I exchanged glances again, our expressions becoming increasingly solemn. We kept silent and watched the people from the Metaphysics Society come closer. Then, they walked in the direction that the Taoist from Mount Longhu had gone. When the group of people had almost disappeared, a flashlight suddenly shone behind them. It seemed that the person was casually checking the surroundings. However, under the light of the flashlight, I saw the face of the person walking at the back of the group. I was stunned, because that face seemed to be Lu Zhenyang's. Chapter 352. After the people from the Metaphysics Society had disappeared, I turned around and asked Zhang Canwen, "Did you see Lu Zhenyang?" Zhang Canwen was bewildered. He frowned and tried to recall. Then, he shook his head. "No, I didn't." I exhaled and felt that I was just being paranoid. Previously, Lu Zhenyang had been attacked by a silver talisman that could rival the power of a heavenly master. That silver spear that was as thick as a bowl had pierced through his chest. Even an immortal wouldn't be able to survive. Just now, I only caught a glimpse of a person who looked somewhat similar to Lu Zhenyang. The Lu family was a metaphysical family. Lu Zhenyang had 4 brothers in his generation. Later on, he had many children. It wasn't strange to see someone who looked similar. After thinking it through, I put this matter aside. Zhang Canwen and I started to discuss another problem that was making us nervous. What happened? Why did the people from Mount Longhu and the Metaphysics Society come? Moreover, why did they send such a big force? Zhang Canwen was just like me. His face was bewildered. His previous confidence was gone. It made sense. The uncontrollable factor was the Han family's heavenly master. With the Han family's power, sending 3 or 4 heavenly masters at once was already the most they could do. Even if the environment here was the same as the outside world, Zhang Canwen wouldn't be afraid because he had the ancient book of the Song of Righteousness. However, the number of heavenly masters from the Metaphysics Society and Mount Longhu added up to more than 10 people. How big could the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum be? Judging from the current situation, their destination was most likely the spring sacrifice ceremony. If the heavenly masters were to scatter, we wouldn't even have a place to hide, let alone deal with the well ghost. Moreover, these were only the people we had seen so far. The Metaphysics Society was so big. Who knew if someone had come here before us? We didn't even know if someone else would come later. If the Taoists and Buddhists were also involved, the situation would be even more dangerous. After discussing for a long time, Zhang Canwen and I came up with a solution. If the situation got out of hand, we would temporarily separate. I would hide in a safe place while Zhang Canwen would deal with it alone. After all, the Jing ghost was a threat to everyone. As long as I didn't show up, the other forces wouldn't have any direct enmity with Zhang Canwen. After coming to an agreement, Zhang Canwen finally relaxed a little. He let out a breath and looked at me apologetically. He opened his mouth as though he wanted to explain something. After all, I had come here to follow him. If we were to separate now, it would be suspicious that he was abandoning me as a burden. I smiled and waved at him, interrupting him. I told him not to think too much and to think about how to deal with the Metaphysics Association and Mount Longhu. Zhang Canwen was actually quite open-minded and flexible. The only thing was that his sect was greater than the heavens. To him, his sect's teachings were like a heavenly law hanging over his head. At this moment, the pressure on his back had already reached an extreme. Naturally, I wouldn't criticize him for such a small matter. Even though we had a countermeasure, we were still extremely curious about the reason why the Metaphysics Association and Longhu Mountain had mobilized such a large force. Furthermore, knowing yourself and your enemy would ensure victory in 100 battles. For our own safety, we had to get to the bottom of this issue. With our strength, it was almost impossible to get an answer from these people. After discussing for a while, I felt that the only hope was to start with Han Wennan. On the morning we entered the mausoleum of the Shang dynasty, I had contacted Han Wennan. At that time, he didn't mention anything about the current situation. I assumed that he didn't know about it. However, since he was with the people of the Metaphysics Association, he must have received the answer. If I could find a chance to contact Han Wennan secretly, he would tell me the truth. Although there was a way, it was hard to say whether it would work or not. The mausoleum of the Shang dynasty was mysterious. With Han Wennan's power, he couldn't run around and leave the Metaphysics Association's heavenly masters. That was why it was hard for me to find a chance to contact him. I could only take one step at a time. Zhang Canwen and I discussed for half a day. Half an hour quietly passed. In order to ensure our safety and to make sure that no one else would come in, the two of us stayed behind the big rock for 4 hours. When we didn't hear any movement, we stood up and walked out. After we came out, Zhang Canwen tore 2 pieces of cloth from his silk coat and gave me one of them. We covered our flashlights with a piece of silk cloth to ensure that the light from the flashlights could only illuminate a small area in front of us. We didn't want to be seen by people in the distance. Then, we continued our journey along the square stones. As for the little zombie, he had sharp senses. Although he couldn't see anything in this dark place, he could easily follow Zhang Canwen and my footstep. He didn't need to use a flashlight at all. After walking for a while, I asked him to go to the farthest place where the light from the flashlight could reach. I asked him to scout and be on guard at the same time. The little zombie had accomplished his task. Although the ghouls were made of energy, they didn't have any evil or murderous aura. Quite the contrary, they were pure and ethereal. Just like the heavenly fetus, they were miraculous plants that had received the nourishment of heaven and earth. Their spiritual senses and divine senses were extremely strong. If Tong Tong wasn't cultivating in the jade bracelet, I would have called her out. I would have asked the two of them to be on guard at the front and the back. That was the safest way. After walking along this road for dozens of meters, the square stones on both sides of the road became denser. Although the size was the same as before, when he shone the flashlight on them, he could see that the outer layer of these stones was made up of simple lines. We didn't hurry to move forward. We stopped and wanted to study the meaning of these patterns. However, no matter how I looked at them, they were just some messy lines. I couldn't figure out the meaning behind them. I even tried to connect the dots, but I couldn't associate these strange patterns with anything else. Begrudgingly, we had to give up on studying them and keep moving forward. Fortunately, as we moved forward, more and more lines appeared on the stones. After walking for around 100 meters, the lines on the stones had formed a complete pattern. Moreover, I wasn't a stranger to this pattern. It was the mystic bird that Yu Fuda, the criminal of the Shenzhen murder and dismemberment case, had used human blood to draw on the wall of his orchard cellar. However, the mystic bird in this pattern was much more exquisite than the one that had been drawn with human blood. Although it was the same picture of the mystic bird, it had legs and wings. The length of the feathers on the wings was clearly defined. Even if we looked at it now, it could still be considered exquisite. However, there wasn't only one mystic bird on the stone. Under the mystic bird's body, there were some messy lines that I couldn't understand. We continued to move forward. Gradually, the pattern on the stone was like a comic strip, becoming clearer and clearer. After walking for dozens of meters, the pattern on the stone next to us became clearer and clearer. In this painting, a giant mystic bird was flying in the sky. While it was flying, A giant white egg with many carvings fell from the sky and landed in the hands of a woman on the ground. The entire painting was exquisite and beautiful. The mystic bird's pattern was very detailed. Every feather on the bird was drawn. The whole thing was slender and graceful, looking mysterious and noble. The woman standing on the ground had her head lowered, so we couldn't see her face. Her body was small and indistinct. We could only see that she was wearing a long robe and was barefooted. However, after taking 2 or 3 steps forward, the pattern on the next stone was completely different. The mystic bird's figure suddenly disappeared, leaving only the woman on the entire rock. She was wearing the same long robe and barefooted. However, this time, the woman's body was magnified several times and looked much more exquisite. Not only her face, but even her long hair that reached the ground behind her was also drawn clearly. Her robe and other details weren't inferior to the mystic bird's. However, the giant white egg in her hands had disappeared. At the same time, her abdomen bulged. From the outline, it was exactly the same as the previous egg. What was more strange was that her abdomen wasn't covered at all. When I said it wasn't covered, I didn't mean her clothes. I meant her body. Her abdomen was transparent. I could see a layer of flesh on the outside, but the situation inside was also clear. It was hard to imagine how those rough lines could make her abdomen transparent. However, I could tell at a glance. Inside that transparent abdomen, I could see a naked child. This child wasn't standing upside down like a fetus. He was standing on one leg with a smile on his face. He seemed to be happily playing. Just like the woman, this child's drawing was exquisite and clear. Not only his face, but his silly smile was also vivid. However, I stared at the child's face and frowned for a long time. I had a strange feeling that this child's face was somewhat familiar. Chapter 353. Looks similar to me? My heart jumped when I heard Jean Canouin's words. I finally understood why I felt that he was so familiar. Although people often look at themselves in the mirror, it was hard to remember how they looked. That was why when I saw the child, I didn't notice that he looked similar to me. Instead, it was Jean Canouin who noticed it first. I, on the other hand, recalled a picture of myself when I was young. When Lu Xening used the power of the Heavenly Master to destroy my house, other than the corpses of my parents, there was also a small photo album that recorded 20 years of my family's life. People from the countryside didn't have many opportunities to take photos. In the thin photo album, there weren't many pictures of my parents. Most of them were of me. From childhood to adulthood, from the full moon to the souvenirs before I went to university, it covered a total of 18 years of my life before I went to university. Among them, there was a picture of my 100 sons. It was a 3-month-old child. His appearance had just started to grow. The dullness on his face had slowly disappeared and he looked intelligent. As for me, maybe I was too naughty at that time. During the 100 sons, I didn't sit there obediently. Instead, I stood on the old-fashioned wooden chair in the countryside with one foot on the ground and the other curled up on the chair. I tried to climb out. I raised my head to look at the camera with a silly smile on my face. The me in the photo was almost the same as the child in the mural in front of me. No matter if it was the appearance, expression, or even the movements, it was the same person. That was why I felt so familiar. This discovery made me speechless for a long time. Jean Canouin studied the mural for a while. When he turned his head, he noticed that my expression wasn't right. He was stunned for a while before asking curiously, "What's wrong? The child in the mural only looks slightly like you. You don't have to be this scared, right?" I smiled wryly. Jean Canouin hadn't seen me when I was young. Looking at my current appearance, it was only slightly similar to the child in the mural. If he had seen my 100 sons, he wouldn't be so optimistic. After hesitating for a while, I suppressed the strange and frightened feeling in my heart. I didn't tell Jean Canouin the truth and just lifted my head to look at the baby in his mother's womb. Then, I turned around and continued to walk forward. After this mural, there were only 6 square stones left in front of him, one on the left and one on the right, a total of 3 rows. Each stone had a large mural painted on it, and the content of each painting was different. In the second mural, the child had already grown into a tall young man, kneeling on the ground beside the bed. The mother who had given birth to him was lying on the bed with her eyes closed, as if she had passed away. In the third mural, the young man was holding a wooden stick in his hand, leading his clansmen to fight against wild beasts. In the fourth mural, the young man was also leading his clansmen into battle, but this time, the targets were humans. In the fifth mural, there was a grand sacrificial ceremony. Countless people were kneeling on the ground, and the one in front was the young man. Different from the previous murals, the people in this mural were very small. Except for the young man in the front, who had drawn them a little more clearly, the others had only used a few strokes. We could barely see that they were humans kneeling on the ground. The reason why these people were drawn so small was to contrast the other person sitting cross-legged in front of the sacrificial altar. That person didn't kneel but just sat there cross-legged. His body was so huge that he seemed to occupy the entire space in the mural. Compared to the people kneeling on the ground, this person was at least 100 times bigger. Besides this giant, there was a huge stone-shaped sacrificial altar next to him. Countless sacrificial items were placed on it. We could see whole cows, sheep, and even human corpses and skulls. After seeing this mural, Zhang Kanwen observed it for a long time. Then, he turned around and discussed with me whether the scenes recorded in this mural could foretell what we would see during the spring sacrifice. I absent-mindedly discussed with him, while my eyes were focused on the giant sitting cross-legged in front of the sacrificial altar. I didn't know why, but the giant's appearance looked very rough in this meticulous mural. Besides the fact that he was a giant with a big body, I couldn't tell anything about his facial features. Even so, I felt strangely familiar with him. It was because I had seen a giant in real life. He was the Tai Sui. Was this giant sitting cross-legged in front of the sacrificial altar the Tai Sui of the Shang dynasty? Compared to the other humans, his body seemed to be even bigger than Xiao Jin's. While I was thinking about this, Zhang Kanwen realized that he couldn't discuss anything with me. He didn't talk anymore. He took out his phone and took a picture of the mural. His action reminded me of something. I hurried to take out my phone and turn around. Starting from the mystic bird painting, I took pictures of the other 8 murals and saved them in my phone. When I took a picture of the last mural, I was surprised again. In this mural, the young man seemed to have become an emperor. He wore a complicated crown on his head, covering his forehead and even his eyes. He stood there sideways, and his clothes and posture were all very exquisite. Behind him were many of his people. They looked like they were kneeling toward the sky or lying on the ground. They had become corpses. He stood there with his left hand in front of his chest and his right hand raised high. He was holding a huge sword that was pointing at the sky. The body of the longsword was almost as wide as a person, and it was completely black in color. Within the body of the sword, one could vaguely see an ink-colored roaming dragon. The dragon's head was in the front, and the dragon's tail was in the back. It seemed to be roaring at the sky as its master raised the sword. Outside the sword was a thick layer of dark green light. This light didn't just cover the sword, but it also flew away. It looked like a cloud of dust that pierced the sky. At the end of the dark green light, the sky seemed to crack. From that hole, I could vaguely see a surging river and a big white stone door floating above the river. That stone door wasn't closed. Instead, it was cracked. The dragon sword in the young man's hand emitted a dark green light that pierced through the hole in the sky and shone on the door. It looked like the young man was trying to push the door open. The previous murals were very exquisite, but compared to this one, they were much rougher. In the last mural, not only was every inch of the figure holding the long sword extremely exquisite, but there were also many colorful paints on it. As a result, the huge longsword had a dragon on the inside and a dark green brilliance on the outside. From the inside to the outside there were 3 layers stacked together, yet it could be perfectly reflected. I doubted that my current painting skills could reach this level. However, what shocked me the most was not the exquisite painting skills, but what was shown in the murals. First, it was the tall young man's appearance. In the previous murals, other than when he was a child, the young man only had his back. In the last mural, only his side profile was shown, and half of it was hidden under the huge crown. However, just by looking at his exposed cheeks and chin, I found a familiar feeling. In other words, when the young man grew up, he looked very similar to me. At least, from what I could tell. Secondly, it was the dark green light that enveloped the sword. No matter how I looked at it, it was the same as shaman chi. From all the murals, the blackbird's egg fell from the sky. The woman gave birth to a child. When the child grew up, he led his people to chase away wild beasts and fight against other tribes. Then, he was crowned king. It was very likely to record the process of the Shang dynasty's establishment. The green light on the young man's sword proved that he was using shaman chi. This was completely different from my previous speculation. Previously, I thought that since the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ceremony could turn the Tai Sui's corpse into a true dragon's vein, it meant that the Shang dynasty was the culprit that ended the shaman chi. However, from the looks of it, the ancestor of the Shang dynasty was using shaman chi. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Chapter 354. This feeling was really inexplicable. I shook my head and placed it to the side. However, my eyes also moved away from the gigantic hole and looked forward. There were no more rocks in front of me, so naturally, there were no murals or even a path. There was only a pitch-black stone wall in front of me. At this moment, Zhang Kanwen and the little zombie were standing next to the stone wall. They seemed to be studying something. I glanced at the mural in front of me again. After taking a few pictures with my phone, I lifted my foot and prepared to walk towards Zhang Kanwen. However, as I was about to walk, I hesitated and reached out to scratch the face of the young man in the mural a few times. The fact that the mural hadn't been destroyed after thousands of years proved that the material it was made of wasn't ordinary. However, under the effect of my witchcraft energy, I easily dug out a few inconspicuous holes. With the few holes as a cover, the young man's face didn't have that familiar feeling when I looked at him again. I didn't know why I did it, but after I finished, I suddenly felt much more relaxed. I exhaled and finally left the mural. I walked towards Zhang Kanwen and the little zombie. After walking over, I looked up and saw that there was a tiny gap on the dark stone wall in front of me. It extended from the ground all the way to the top where my eyes couldn't see. Judging from the gap, the stone wall in front of me was likely to be a door. After the previous experience with the door, I naturally wouldn't overestimate myself and interfere. I turned to ask Zhang Kanwen how to get through it. Zhang Kanwen placed both of his hands on the stone wall and seemed to be trying to push the door open. After hearing my question, he retracted his hand and shook his head. There was no mention of this door in the records of my sect. However, I just tried it. With my power, I can't push the door open. I'm afraid that I'll have to use another page of the Song of Morality. His words were full of bitterness. I reckoned that he was feeling extremely pained. There were only so many pages of the Song of Morality. Every page that was used was one less page. Just the 2 doors had used up 2 pages. If something unexpected happened after entering, who knew how many pages would be wasted? Not to mention Zhang Kanwen, anyone would feel distressed for a long time. However, Zhang Kanwen didn't hesitate for too long. His gaze became firm and he didn't say anything else. He took out another page of the Song of Morality and held it in his palm. After chanting a few lines, he carefully placed the page on his chest. After a few seconds, a golden light flashed. Zhang Canwen had once again entered the Heavenly Master realm. Then, just like the previous door, Zhang Canwen reached out his hand and grabbed me with one hand and the little zombie with the other. Then, he stomped on the ground with both of us and leaped into the air, crashing into the mountain wall in front of us. With the previous experience, I didn't panic this time. I just stayed alert. After all, the people from the Taoist and metaphysical societies were in front of us. It was possible that they were behind the door. If we went in and bumped into them, we would have to run away immediately. While we were thinking about these questions, we didn't expect that after we reattached the stone wall, we didn't crash into it like last time. Instead, there was a muffled sound, and the three of us bounced back and fell to the ground, feeling dizzy. Zhang Canwen and I were dumbfounded. Enduring the dizziness in our heads, we raised our heads to look at the stone wall in front of us. The stone wall was still as black as before. Our fierce collision didn't leave a single mark on it. Could it be that we were at the end of the road and there was no door? That shouldn't be the case. We had just seen the people from the Taoist and metaphysical societies walk in from this road. If there was no door, where did they go? Moreover, the crack on the stone wall was very obvious. Aside from the fact that there was a hidden door, there was no other explanation. Zhang Canwen turned around and exchanged looks with me. Then, he got up. He didn't try to use the previous method. Instead, he placed his hand on the stone wall and pushed. I immediately understood what he meant. Since there wasn't a mechanism like the previous door, it could be a door that required great strength to push open. Previously, we couldn't push it open because our cultivation base wasn't high enough. Now that he had the power of a heavenly master, he might be able to push it open. However, this possibility was eliminated shortly after. Zhang Canwen pushed a few times. His face turned red, but the stone door in front of us didn't move at all. It didn't even look like it was moving. This time we were desperate. We looked at each other for a long time. Zhang Canwen finally gave up. He leaned against the stone wall and slumped to the ground. He lifted his head and looked at me in frustration. "What do you think?" I thought for a while and shook my head with a wry smile. If we knew this earlier, we would have followed the people from the Taoist or metaphysical societies. At least we could have seen what method they used to open this door. Hearing my words, Zhang Canwen's frown deepened. He turned to look at the stone wall in front of him and angrily punched it. He muttered, "This doesn't make sense. I'm not too sure about the cultivation of those 7th-rank Taoist priests, but among the Metaphysics Association's heavenly masters, the ones with the highest cultivation base, President Gu and Lu Ziang, shouldn't be much higher than my current cultivation base. Since they can open this door, it doesn't make sense that I can't even move it. There must be some trick that we don't know." I nodded. When I was about to say something, Zhang Canwen's eyes suddenly focused. He reached out and patted the stone wall again. He raised his voice. "Mechanism. There must be a hidden mechanism on this stone wall to open the door." My eyes instantly brightened. That's right. Why didn't I think of such a simple reason? The Heavenly Master's power couldn't move the door, and the method passed down by Zhang Canwen's master was also useless. There might be a simple mechanism. Zhang Canwen excitedly stood up and searched the stone door on the right. He said to me, "Come, let's search together. You search the left side and I'll search the right side." I nodded and moved closer to use the flashlight to search the stone door on the left. However, I couldn't find anything suspicious after searching for a long time. I frowned and thought. Some mechanisms were well hidden. I couldn't see anything with my eyes. I had to use my hands to search carefully. Thus, I held the flashlight in my left hand and started to search the door with my right. Who would have thought that as soon as my hand touched the stone door, I would feel something strange? Then I was stunned. It wasn't because I was lucky that I had found the hidden mechanism. It was because when I put my hand on the door, I felt that the stone door that Zhang Canwen hadn't moved for a long time seemed to have moved a little. I couldn't believe it. I tried to press on the stone door. Then, I heard the sound of stone rubbing against each other. Then, I turned to look at the place between Jean Canwin and I. The shallow crack on the stone wall had now become as wide as a finger. I was dumbfounded. What's going on? Jean Canwin also heard the noise. He turned to look at the crack and became excited. He turned to me and praised, "You're amazing! You found the mechanism so quickly." Then, he didn't wait for my reply and pushed the door again. The result was the same as before. No matter how hard he tried, the stone door didn't move. He exclaimed in surprise and turned to look at me in confusion. I also looked as if I had seen a ghost. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know how to explain it. I reached out and gently pushed the stone door again. The crack was big enough for 2 people to pass through. Jean Canwin was also stunned. He lowered his head to look at the stone door. Then, he lifted his head to look at me. He didn't know what to say. I forced a smile and spread my arms. "Don't ask me. I don't know what happened. I just pushed it a little, and the door opened." Jean Canwin was bewildered for a while. He suppressed his doubts and didn't ask me. Instead, he craned his neck to look through the crack on the stone door. Then, he said, "We shouldn't stay here for long. Let's go in first." Then, he took the lead and walked through the stone door. I called the little zombie, and we walked through the stone door together. After entering the door, I looked at the darkness in front of me. I heaved a sigh of relief. I was worried that I would bump into the people from the Taoist and metaphysical societies. This place was safe. As I was thinking about this, I turned around and was about to close the stone door. However, as soon as I turned around, I heard a voice. Chapter 355. I had goosebumps all over my body. My body stiffened and I didn't dare to move an inch. This voice wasn't Jean Canwin's. "Who is it?" At the same time, Jean Canwin's voice and the light from the flashlight came to me. However, the vigilance in his voice disappeared quickly. He asked suspiciously, "Why are you here?" Only then did my heart relax. I hastily turned around and saw that Nangong was lazily leaning against the wall. He was laughing as he looked at me. I took another path that also led to this place. Our journey should be about the same. I've already been here for a few hours. How come you two have only just arrived? His voice wasn't low, so I didn't answer him. I looked around vigilantly as I was worried that his voice would attract trouble. Nangong looked at me and waved his hand. "You don't need to look around. The people from Mount Longhu and the Metaphysics Association have already arrived at the sacrificial hall. There's no one here." I nodded and calmed down. I explained to him that we had wasted a lot of time hiding from the people from Mount Longhu and the Metaphysics Association. Then, we encountered some trouble at the stone door. Then, I suddenly remembered that Nangong was a mysterious fellow. Perhaps he knew why I could open the stone door. I hurried to tell him what had happened and asked for the reason. Jean Canwin heard my question and came over. He lifted his bright eyes to look at Nangong. Nangong shrugged his shoulders and said indifferently, "Buddha helps those who are fated. This stone door has some Buddha's nature. Since it was fated with you, it let you open it." With that, he still had that mischievous grin on his face as he reached out to close the stone door. He then said, "You see, I have some fate with this stone door, haha." Jean Canwin's forehead was full of black lines while I wore a helpless face. However, since Nangong didn't want to talk about it, we couldn't force him. We could only put this matter aside for now. I asked Nangong and learned that he also wanted to go to the sacrificial hall. The 4 of us walked together and slowly moved forward. While we were chatting, I asked Nangong about his purpose in coming to the royal tomb of Een ruins. He laughed and said that he wanted to help me find something. I already knew that he wanted to find something, but he said that he wanted to help me find something, which made me very confused. After hesitating for a while, I took out the shell that I had found by accident and handed it to him. "Are you looking for this?" Nangong received the shell and glanced at it. His footsteps halted. Then, he asked me in surprise, "Where did you find this thing?" I briefly explained the situation of the shell to him. Nangong asked me again. After confirming that there was only one shell, the solemn expression on his face disappeared. He casually threw the shell back to me and said, "When you reach the Celestial Master Realm, you will know what it is after studying it for a while. It should be useful to you. But this isn't the thing I'm looking for. I've already searched around the royal tomb, and that thing should be near the sacrificial hall." Since he didn't want to tell me the details, I didn't ask further. I just kept walking. Not long after, Nangong suddenly opened his mouth and asked me absent-mindedly, "I remember that there was a row of square stones in front of the stone door. There were many murals drawn on them. Did you study them carefully?" Hearing him mention murals, my heart sank. I turned to look at him. After a moment of silence, I nodded. "I saw them. What's wrong?" Nangong looked at me meaningfully, but he didn't want to talk about it. He just waved his hand and said, "It's nothing. Those murals are very interesting. If you have nothing to do, you should think about them a few more times. It will help you in the future." He still didn't want to explain it clearly. But because the man in the murals looked too similar to me, and there were many strange things about the murals, I didn't want to talk about it. Thus, I nodded and waved the phone in my hand. "I've already taken pictures of those murals. I'll look at them a few more times." Nangong was stunned for a moment, then nodded. Just as he was about to walk forward, he seemed to have thought of something, then turned around and whispered to me, "It's best if you don't tell anyone about the mural, including Zhang Kanwen." I didn't understand what he meant. I frowned and looked at Zhang Kanwen, who was walking in front of us. When I was taking pictures, Brother Zhang also took some pictures. Nangong didn't seem to care. He waved his hand and said, "It's okay to take pictures. Just don't mention it. We're almost at the memorial hall. I'm going to check it out first." Then, he quickened his pace and called out to Zhang Kanwen. He carefully walked to the front of the group. I also quickened my pace to catch up with him. However, I was still thinking about Nangong's words. It was very strange. Zhang Kanwen had taken pictures of those murals. When he returned home, he would study them. No matter what they contained, he would find something after studying them a few more times. Nangong said, "It's okay as long as I don't tell Zhang Kanwen. What does he mean?" Before I could figure it out, Zhang Kanwen pulled me and gestured for me to keep quiet. Then, he pointed to a far distance, signaling me to look in that direction. I lifted my head and focused. I could vaguely see a small dot of light in the distance. I guessed that was the location of the sacrificial altar, based on Nangong's words. Nangong also turned around. He didn't say anything and just pointed to our left. Then, he walked in that direction and signaled us to follow him. I trusted Nangong a lot. I called the little zombie and followed him. Zhang Kanwen didn't ask much. He followed me and walked in the direction Nangong had pointed. After walking in this direction for around 5 minutes, we saw 2 giant stone pillars in front of us. Since we had turned off our flashlights, we couldn't see what was on top of the stone pillars with the dim light coming from a distance. However, from the general architectural style, I guessed it was a tall corridor or a pavilion. Nangong seemed to be very familiar with this place. He didn't even look around and directly walked through the space between 2 stone pillars. We followed behind him and continued to walk forward. Not long after that, we saw another 2 stone pillars next to each other. After that, there were more stone pillars after a certain distance. It seemed that this place was a common corridor in ancient times, but it was a little too big. As soon as I confirmed that, the stone pillars disappeared. 2 stone walls appeared in front of us, one on the left and the other on the right. They were sandwiched together to form a massive doorway. Just like before, we couldn't see anything above us. We could only guess from the shape that it was a massive doorway. Nangong didn't hesitate and walked in. We had to follow him. After entering the doorway, I thought it would be even darker inside. However, it wasn't much different from the outside. I turned my head and looked around. The left side was pitch black, as if there was a wall blocking the light. However, the right side was empty, and we could see a light source in the distance. Moreover, this place seemed to be much closer to the sacrificial hall. The light source wasn't blurry anymore, and we could even see the people around the light source. The air in this place can isolate spiritual senses, and this hall can isolate all kinds of sound and light. We don't need to be too careful here. No matter how loud we talk, the people outside won't be able to hear us. Look, there's a window in front of us. It doesn't have glass, but there's a transparent cloth covering it. If we go to the window, we can see everything happening in the sacrificial hall. Nangong pointed to the right side where the light was coming from. While talking, he walked toward that direction. I followed him for more than 100 meters before I could see it clearly. It was a window, but it was ridiculously big. From a distance, I didn't think there were any walls. As we walked closer, we could see that the cloth covering the window wasn't completely transparent. It looked more like a fabric made of some kind of transparent silk thread. Silk thread was transparent, and the holes in the fabric were big. It gave us a feeling that we couldn't see anything, especially when we peeled the holes to the size of an eye. I asked Nangong, and he told me that even if we made such a big hole, it wouldn't affect the soundproof and light-isolating function of the cloth. I calmed down and lifted my head to look at the sacrificial hall. This place was really close to the sacrificial hall, but I could only see the grand gate and the people sitting cross-legged in front of the hall. I carefully counted and found that there were only 4 people in front of the hall. They were the people I had seen in the square passage. 2 of them were 6th-rank Taoist priests wearing purple muslin and lotus-shaped crowns. The other 2 were from the Metaphysics Society. One of them was Lu Chengqian, the one who had searched me in the Metaphysics Society's headquarters. The last one was Han Wennan. He sat far away from the other 3, and he was also quite far from the strong light at the entrance of the hall. Half of his body was hidden in the darkness. The other people from the Dragon Tiger Mountain and the Metaphysics Society weren't here. I guessed they had already entered the sacrificial hall. I was extremely curious about the large number of people from the Metaphysics Association and the arrival of a few people from Mount Longhu. I had long wanted to contact Han Wennan and ask about the reason. Now was a good opportunity. I hastily asked Nangong, "Can you think of a way to send a message to Han Wennan without alerting anyone?" Nangong's lazy expression disappeared. He lifted his head to look at Han Wennan. He didn't answer me but told me, "I told you that you can't trust this person." There was a strong hostility on his face. I was stunned. Then, I remembered that when I had reunited with Nangong, he had told me to be careful of Han Wennan. However, I hadn't paid much attention to it. Nangong turned to look at me when I didn't reply. He asked me playfully, "Why do you want to send him a message?" "Of course, I want to ask him why the Metaphysics Society and Dragon Tiger Mountain have come here," I answered. Nangong shook his head. "I roughly know why the Metaphysics Society and Dragon Tiger Mountain are here. You don't need to ask him." I was stunned. Nangong knew? I hurriedly asked him for an answer. Nangong frowned and pondered for a while before shaking his head. "I don't know how to tell you. You will naturally know when the sacrificial hall opens." I was stunned. This fella is always like this. He's always so secretive and only tells me half of what he wants to say. I hesitated. As I trusted Nangong, I was prepared to let it go. However, Zhang Kanwen suddenly said, "You said that you know the reason, but you didn't tell us. You even told us not to ask anyone else. Don't you think that's too much?" It was obvious that Zhang Kanwen was anxious about the sudden appearance of the Metaphysics Society and Dragon Tiger Mountain. His words were filled with anger. Nangong had a good temper. He didn't get angry after hearing what he said. He just smiled. "We should be more cautious. It's for your own good." Zhang Kanwen didn't appreciate his kindness. He turned to look at me and said, "The effect of the book hasn't dissipated yet. The 4 people there haven't reached the celestial master realm. It won't be difficult to contact Han Wunan without alerting anyone. You 2 wait here. I'll be right back." After he said that, he immediately walked back. Chapter 356. After Zhang Kanwen left, Nangong's face became solemn. He extended his hand and pulled my arm. "The people from the Metaphysics Society can't be trusted. If that Wenshan kid goes there, he'll be courting death. I'm afraid we'll be implicated as well. We can't stay here for long. There's a great palace in front of us. Let's go there." As he said that, he pulled me away without giving me a chance to explain. This fellow had at least the cultivation base of a celestial master. He had great strength. I staggered a few steps before I managed to steady myself. I shook off his hand and said angrily, "There are only 4 people who haven't even reached the celestial master realm. How could Zhang Kanwen be in danger? Even if he's in danger, it won't affect us for the time being. Why are you so anxious? Let's observe the situation first." Then, I was afraid that Nangong would forcefully pull me away again, so I quickly returned to the window and looked at the sacrificial hall. Even though I said it casually, I was actually a little worried. After all, there were close to 10 masters from the Metaphysics Society and Dragon Tiger Mountain. Moreover, in such a place, no one dared to be careless. There was no reason for them to only send 4 people in the knowledge realm to guard the entrance. There might be other masters in the dark on guard. Zhang Kanwen might alert them if he went over. This was also the reason why I suggested to let Nangong pass the message. Although Zhang Kanwen had the cultivation base of a heavenly master after using the ancient book Song of Righteousness, he was still far behind Nangong. Of course, Nangong's words were just to scare us. This place naturally isolated spiritual senses. Even if there were heavenly masters guarding in the dark, as long as Zhang Kanwen was careful, it wouldn't be difficult for him to escape. Not to mention, it was impossible for him to implicate us. What I was more worried about was that Zhang Kanwen had left in a fit of anger. It was obvious that he wasn't in a good mood. If he rashly went there and caused a commotion, it might attract the attention of the Metaphysics Society and the heavenly masters from Mount Longhu. That would be really dangerous. Luckily, that didn't happen. I watched from the window for a minute, but Zhang Kanwen still hadn't appeared at the sacrificial hall. It was obvious that he hadn't lost his cool and was hiding in the dark, waiting for an opportunity. I exhaled and turned to look at Nangong. I had to admit that he had a good temper. He walked to my side and didn't try to persuade me again. He didn't show any displeasure on his face either. He just gazed at the sacrificial hall with a bit of seriousness and vigilance. Around 5 minutes later, Zhang Kanwen finally appeared in my field of vision. He was very smart. Although Han Wunan was sitting in a dark place far away from the entrance of the sacrificial hall, he didn't choose to go to her directly. Instead, he went around to the wall where the main entrance of the sacrificial hall was, and moved towards the entrance of the sacrificial hall bit by bit. In this way, he avoided the gazes of the other 3 people sitting at the entrance of the sacrificial hall. What was more, because Han Wunan was sitting far away from the light source at the entrance of the sacrificial hall, he couldn't see the darkness in the distance at all. Therefore, he didn't sit with his back facing the sacrificial hall like the other 3 people at the entrance of the sacrificial hall. Instead, he sat sideways at a 90-degree angle with the sacrificial hall. In this way, while Zhang Kanwen was moving towards the entrance of the sacrificial hall, he not only avoided the gazes of the other 3 people, but also allowed Han Wunan to see him. It turned out that Zhang Kanwen's method was very effective. As soon as his figure appeared, I saw Han Wunan's cross-legged body move a bit. Apparently, Han Wunan had already discovered him. However, neither of them acted rashly. Zhang Kanwen was still moving slowly towards the entrance of the sacrificial hall. As he got closer to the light source at the entrance of the sacrificial hall, his figure became clearer. When I could vaguely see Zhang Canwen's facial features, he finally stopped moving. He slowly raised his hand and made a gesture to Han Wen'an, indicating that he should find a chance to go to the side of the sacrificial hall. After making this gesture, Zhang Canwen slowly moved his body and returned to the darkness in the direction he had come from. Han Wen'an knew that I had a close relationship with Zhang Canwen. A few days ago, the three of us had met in Anyang City. He knew that Zhang Canwen and I were on the same trip to the royal mausoleum of the Shang dynasty. Therefore, when he saw Zhang Canwen, he knew that I was there and would go to see Zhang Canwen. Things didn't go beyond my expectation. After Zhang Canwen's figure had disappeared for about 3 minutes, Han Wen'an stood up from the ground and stretched his body. He slowly walked to the side of the three people at the entrance of the sacrificial hall and said something to them in a low voice. Then, he walked towards the direction Zhang Canwen had pointed at and disappeared in the darkness. Right at this moment, Nangong, who had been standing next to me without saying anything, suddenly said to me, "You wait here. I will go to the entrance to see what's going on. If they come here, I will bring them here." After saying that, he didn't wait for my reply and directly walked towards the entrance of the sacrificial hall. I understood that Nangong was still worried. However, due to my attitude, he didn't say it directly. After Nangong left, I observed the situation at the sacrificial hall while waiting anxiously. Not long after, faint voices came from the direction of the entrance. I quickly turned off the flashlight and crouched down to hide under the windowsill. I concentrated my ears and listened carefully. Soon, I heard that it was Zhang Canwen's voice. Only then did I relax. I stood up, turned on the flashlight again, and walked forward. I had only taken a few steps when Nangong arrived with Zhang Canwen and Han Wen'an. The corners of my mouth curled into a smile as I walked forward. In the end, nothing happened. We didn't care about the small discord. Zhang Canwen pointed at me and smiled at Han Wen'an, who was next to him. "You see, I didn't lie to you. The Book of Divinity is right here." At this moment, Han Wen'an walked a few steps forward and stood in front of me. He said to me apologetically, "The people from the Metaphysics Society suddenly appeared with me and second uncle when we were preparing to enter the royal mausoleum. I really didn't have the time to find a chance to inform you." I smiled and shook my head. "It's okay. This place isolates spiritual senses. As long as I'm careful, the heavenly masters from the Metaphysics Society won't be able to find us. However, I'm a little curious. Why did the Metaphysics Society suddenly make such a big move? Also, why did the Taoist priests from Mount Longhu come here?" This was the main reason why Zhang Canwen took the risk to find Han Wen'an. After asking, I lifted my head and looked at him, eagerly waiting for him to answer my doubts. Han Wen'an didn't directly answer but shook his head. "Not only the people from Mount Longhu, but there are also people from the Taoist and Buddhist sects in the sacrificial hall. All of them have heavenly master cultivation base." What? I was stunned. Even the people from the Buddhist sects came? This made me even more curious. I hurriedly asked Han Wen'an, "What's the reason?" Han Wen'an shook his head again. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm not sure, but I heard from my second uncle that the Metaphysics Society came here to take a key. The people from Mount Longhu, Taoist, and Buddhist sects also came here for the same purpose." Key. I vaguely remembered that when Zhang Canwen and I were hiding outside on the stone path, I vaguely heard the Taoist priests from Mount Longhu mention the words medicine and "we must get it." After hearing Han Wen'an's words, I guessed I didn't hear him clearly. They didn't say medicine, but key. But what kind of key could make the strongest forces of the Metaphysics Society come here to fight for it? I asked a few more questions, but besides that, Han Wen'an didn't know anything else. Moreover, he had lied and said that he needed to pee to come here. We couldn't stay here for long. We had to leave immediately. The two of us didn't dare to talk anymore. We hurriedly sent him away and returned to the sacrificial hall. After he left, Zhang Canwen and I talked for a while, but we didn't have any clue. We didn't know what the key Han Wen'an had mentioned was. However, Zhang Canwen's complexion looked better. This fellow was a simple man. As long as it had nothing to do with the heavy responsibility of his sect, he wouldn't care about anything else. At this moment, Nangong urged me to go with him to another hall. Since Han Wen'an has come here, we can't be sure that others won't notice us. It's better to leave this place for safety. I thought it made sense, so I called Zhang Canwen and followed him. On the way, I couldn't help but be curious. I asked Nangong, "You said that you came here to find something. Is it the key that Han Wen'an mentioned? And you said that you wanted to help me find something. What's the use of this key?" I thought that my speculation was correct. However, Nangong shook his head. "I'm not looking for the key. I'm looking for something else. As for the key he mentioned, I already have it. I don't need to take it from him." "He already has the key?" I was even more confused. Just as I was about to ask again, Nangong, who was walking next to me, suddenly stopped. I was bewildered. Before I could react, a strong light shone in front of us. Then I heard a voice. "The surviving members of the shaman tribe are here." It was Lu Xiang's voice. I squinted and saw Lu Xiang, President Gu, and the Heavenly Master of the Han family standing in front of me. There were around 7 or 8 people standing there. Among them, there were 6 Heavenly Masters who had besieged me at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Association. After I saw them clearly, my first reaction was to run away. This place was isolated from spiritual senses. As long as I could run away, even if they were Heavenly Masters, they wouldn't be able to find me. With that thought in mind, I turned around and prepared to run to the entrance of the hall. However, after I turned around, I didn't take a single step forward. Behind us, there were 3 Taoist priests holding ivory jade tablets and wearing primeval crowns. I didn't know when they had arrived, but they were looking at us expressionlessly. Nangong had told me that when I met the Heavenly Masters, as long as he was here, he could protect me. But now, with so many Heavenly Masters from Mount Longhu and the Metaphysics Association, how could he protect me? I turned around and saw Nangong's gloomy face. It was obvious that he wasn't omnipotent. Chapter 357. Han Wen'an. Apart from him, I couldn't think of any other reason why the Metaphysics Society and the Masters from Longhu Mountain would surround us. This place was isolated from spiritual senses, so the people from the Metaphysics Society couldn't have found us. It was even more impossible for Zhang Canwen to lure Han Wen'an and expose us. It had only been less than 5 minutes since Han Wen'an had arrived. The Masters from the Metaphysics Society couldn't have figured out the terrain and set up a pincer attack in such a short time. The only explanation was that Han Wen'an had betrayed me. At that moment, I finally remembered that Nangong had reminded me to be wary of Han Wen'an when I had first met him in Anyang. When I had tried to contact Han Wen'an earlier, he had been adamantly against it. It was a pity that Zhang Canwen's impulsive action had ruined all of Nangong's efforts. However, I still didn't understand why Han Wen'an would do that. If he simply wanted to deal with me, why would he wait until now? If it weren't for him in Shenzhen, I would have been dead already. He had saved me in Shenzhen, but he had betrayed me in Anyang. Why? While I was in a daze, I saw a figure appear next to the Metaphysics Society's heavenly teachers. It was none other than Han Wen'an. I lifted my head and stared at him. I didn't care about the masters in front of me and asked him in a low voice, "Why?" Han Wen'an was looking at me, but he tilted his head slightly to avoid my gaze. He stood there in silence and didn't say a word. I wasn't willing to give up, so I asked him again, "Why?" This time, Han Wen'an finally opened his mouth. He tilted his head to the side and didn't look at me. He squeezed out a few words. "Good and evil can't coexist. Good and evil cannot coexist. I mumbled these words. I suddenly remembered what the celestial master of the Han family had told Han Wennan in the basement in Shenzhen. At that time, Han Wennan didn't listen to his fourth uncle, so I thought he didn't agree with him. I didn't expect him to say something similar today. However, this reason still couldn't explain why he had saved me and then harmed me. The people from the Metaphysics Society didn't give me a chance to ask again. Lu Ziang suddenly sneered coldly and said, "The Han family's kid is right. Good and evil can't coexist. In the battle of witchcraft, there is only him and no me. To us cultivators, the sorcerer tribe is like a tree surrounded by vines. The thicker the vines, the thinner the tree. Only by killing the sorcerer tribe can we cultivators live in peace in this world." Brother Lu's words are wise. President Gu chimed in and said, "However, I haven't heard any news about the remaining members of the sorcerer tribe for many years. I'm sure there aren't many of them left in this world. The old president said that as long as we capture these two people, the witch tribe will be destroyed." After saying that, he ignored me and looked at Nangong. After a long moment of silence, a smile appeared on his solemn face. He coldly said to Nangong, "You finally showed yourself." My heart skipped a beat when I heard him. I didn't look at President Gu, but turned to look at Han Wennan. I finally understood why he had betrayed me after saving me. It had been a scheme from the start. His target wasn't me, but Nangong. He, or the Metaphysics Association, wants to use me to deal with Nangong. Han Wennan had been assigned this task from the start. He had only saved me to get close to me. I had always thought that I had been secretive, which was why I hadn't been caught by the Metaphysics Association. Now, it seemed that the Metaphysics Association had gotten hold of my whereabouts and knew that I was involved in the Yu family's orchard. That was why they had set up a scheme for Han Wennan to execute. After thinking it through, I felt even more remorseful. I had trusted Han Wennan so much. In the end, not only did I harm myself, but I also harmed Nangong. Good and evil cannot coexist. I should have understood this after I understood the reason behind the battle of witchcraft. Unfortunately, I was too naive and thought that nothing was absolute. I trusted Han Wennan so easily. Thinking back to all the things that had happened since I got to know him, I had to admit that the Metaphysics Association had chosen the right person. Han Wennan had always been a righteous person. No matter what he did, he was always upright. Anyone who talked about him would praise him as a good man. However, once a person like him decided to lie, no one would suspect him. Thinking about this, my heart suddenly jumped. I turned around and glanced at Zhang Kanwen. Nangong had said that the people from the Metaphysics Association couldn't be trusted. Zhang Kanwen was also a member of the Metaphysics Association. I was the one who had suggested looking for Han Wennan to understand the situation, but after Nangong had rejected me, I had changed my mind. However, Zhang Kanwen had suddenly become angry and had insisted on looking for Han Wennan despite our opposition. Han Wennan was a pawn of the Metaphysics Association. What about Zhang Kanwen? My heart sank and my hands couldn't stop trembling. I didn't dare to think about it further. Nangong didn't respond to what President Gu had said. His expression didn't even change. He just stood there in silence. President Gu seemed to want to say something, but a Taoist master from Longhu Mountain who was standing behind us seemed to be impatient. He said, "The sacrificial hall is about to open. There's no time to lose. Let's hurry over after we capture these two. Those bald donkeys from the Buddhist sect have a close relationship with the people from the Taoist Association. We can't let them take the initiative." After hearing what he said, President Gu nodded and didn't say anything else. He extended his hand and gestured for the people beside him to take action. I stood there without moving. I knew that I didn't stand a chance against the group of Taoist masters. My only hope now was Nangong. From his expression, I could tell that he didn't have the power to save me. However, even if he couldn't save me, it would be a good thing if he could escape. In reality, I didn't have any hope of surviving. I only hoped that Nangong could escape. That way, I would feel less guilty. The 6 Taoist masters from the Metaphysics Association moved and arrived in front of us. Before Nangong could react, Zhang Kanwen, who had been standing next to me, suddenly moved and stood in front of us. He immediately blocked the 6 Taoist masters with his blade. He did not open his mouth to speak. Instead, he took out a few pages of the Song of Morality and pasted them on his chest. He hurriedly chanted a spell, and the few pages glowed with a golden color. His aura also continued to rise. After doing all that, he looked coldly at the Taoist masters from the Metaphysics Association and said, "If you want to kill Zhou Yi, you'll have to get through me." I was shocked. I suspected that Zhang Kanwen was in cahoots with the Metaphysics Association, but I didn't expect him to express his attitude so decisively. Lu Ziang stood in the middle of the group of Taoist masters. When he heard what Zhang Kanwen said, he instantly laughed and said in disdain, "You're just at the glory of consciousness realm. You used a secret technique to barely reach the Taoist master realm. You want to stop us? What a joke." With that, he raised his right hand and a shadow appeared above Zhang Kanwen's head. It seemed to carry a tremendous force as it whizzed towards him. At that moment, President Gu, who was far away, suddenly extended his hand and pointed. The shadow suddenly froze in midair. Lu Ziang was displeased and turned to look at President Gu. President Gu didn't look at him but stared at Zhang Kanwen instead. He said, "As far as I know, you're the only one left from Wenshan's lineage. Could it be that you're going to ignore the inheritance of your sect for the sake of this surviving witch?" Zhang Kanwen gritted his teeth and didn't say a word. President Gu continued, "You're the director of the Metaphysics Association headquarters. Although you've mistakenly made friends with bandits, as long as you turn back now, it's not too late. I can let bygones be bygones." With that, he looked at Zhang Kanwen with obvious concern in his eyes. Zhang Kanwen finally spoke. He lifted his head to look at President Gu and said stiffly, "There are things a gentleman can do and cannot do." With that, a withered shumei appeared in his hand. It was the shumei artifact that I had found in Zhang Bingqing's house in Meizhou. I had already handed it to Zhang Kanwen when I saw him. President Gu sighed, "There are things you can do after what you can't do. Why did you?" Chapter 358. Half a month ago, when Zhang Kanwen and I were on our way to the Dragon's Gate with the Snake Spirit, we were stopped by Lu Qingyi and the people from the Metaphysics Society. Because we had to hide our identities, we couldn't use the Yin-Yang Yama brush, so I had to use the Xuemei magical item. Back then, Xuemei's magical device had unleashed a terrifying stream of crimson light that had seriously injured Lu Qingping and Dan Feng. Lu Qingping was only in the mid-glorious memory stage, which meant he wasn't as strong as me. But Dan Feng was the vice president of the Metaphysics Society, and was in the late glorious memory stage. Even he had been seriously injured, which showed how extraordinary the Xuemei magical item was. At the time, I had thought that I had fully unleashed the power of the magical item. But now, seeing Zhang Kanwen's actions, I realized how laughable I had been. The Xuemei magical item had changed in Zhang Kanwen's hands. There was no longer any crimson light. Instead, the crimson light spread out from the withered branch, forming something that looked like a spiderweb. It shot toward Lu Ziang like a bolt of lightning, and the surrounding darkness made it look even more terrifying. Seeing this layer of blood curtain, the sneer on Lu Ziang's face instantly disappeared. In a split second, a dark blue square seal suddenly appeared above his head. It gave off a blue light like a glowing sapphire. However, this square seal was very small, not even half the size of an adult's fist. But after it appeared, the originally extremely fast blood curtain seemed to have an infinite resistance in front of it, and its speed suddenly dropped by a large amount. I looked at the blue seal and thought to myself, this must be the other seal of the Lu family's legacy magical item. I've seen several seals in Lu Zhenyang's hands, including the yellow-white Mount Tai seal. It's said to be the Lu family's legacy magical item. I've taken it from Lu Zhenyang twice, but the Mount Tai seal is engraved with a spell formation that only members of the Lu family can use. I studied it for a long time, but couldn't break it. Eventually, I gave it to Xie Chenghua in exchange for the Mo family's EMO bead. At this moment, the seal in Lu Ziyang's hand should also be a legacy immortal treasure. Its power was truly astonishing. Back when Lu Zhenyang used the Mount Tai seal, the power he displayed was like a grain of rice compared to this blue square seal. It was simply incomparable. Zhang Canwen's expression didn't change in the slightest. His eyes remained fixed on Lu Ziyang as he drew a circle in the air with Xuemei. Then, he opened his mouth and uttered a single syllable incantation. As he spat out the incantation, the blood screen that was trying its best to resist the blue square seal suddenly burst open. Countless blood-colored fragments flew towards Lu Ziyang. They looked like pieces of flesh and blood flying in all directions. It was extremely horrifying. This time, the blue square seal seemed to be unable to stop them. The blood-colored fragments were extremely fast. With a whistling sound, they directly rushed towards Lu Ziyang's body without any hindrance and let out dull sounds of collision. I was shaken and thought that Lu Ziyang had been severely injured. Who would have thought that he would just stand there without a trace of pain on his face? Instead, he had a slight smile on his face. It was as if he didn't care about the blood shard at all. He just casually waved his sleeves to block the shard that was flying towards his face. This time I was dumbfounded. Could it be that Zhang Canwen had used the Song of Righteousness several times in a row, and yet his strength was still so much lower than Lu Ziyang's? No, that couldn't be right. I carefully observed Lu Ziyang's movements and quickly discovered that his black Taoist robe was glowing faintly. It was clear that his Taoist robe was also a magic treasure. Moreover, it had strong defensive abilities that allowed it to easily block Zhang Canwen's Taoist magic. Seeing that the blood curtain was ineffective, Zhang Canwen coldly spat out a single-sound incantation. As he uttered the incantation, the blood-colored fragments exploded a second time. This time, all the fragments exploded into fine powder that rose into the air and formed a blood mist. Almost instantly, a large amount of blood mist enveloped Zhang Canwen and Lu Ziyang. Under the cover of the blood mist, the blue square seal that was floating above Lu Ziyang's head was completely annihilated. There was no more light coming from it. Zhang Canwen's morale was greatly boosted. He uttered another incantation. The blood mist seemed to have a life of its own as it wrapped around Lu Ziyang. The volume of the blood mist became smaller and smaller, but its color became darker. After chanting the incantation, Zhang Canwen didn't stop. He immediately recited the Song of Righteousness. This time, Zhang Canwen recited the first 8 lines of the Song of Righteousness in a row. The heaven and earth have righteousness, giving it a chaotic form. Below are the rivers and mountains, above are the sun and stars. To people, it is called righteousness, filling the sky. The road to the emperor's realm should be clear, containing peace and spitting out the Ming court. His voice became louder and louder. When he recited the last line, it was like a huge bell. There was an echo in the palace. As the last syllable ended, there seemed to be a sudden gust of wind in the dark palace. I looked closely and saw a white aura blowing towards Lu Ziyang from behind Zhang Canwen. It looked like a flowing wind, but it wasn't cold at all. Instead, it gave off a sacred feeling. At this moment, the sneer on Lu Ziyang's face disappeared. His face was solemn. His right hand, which was originally behind his back, suddenly moved in front of him. His palm faced inwards as he rubbed his abdomen. Then, he raised his arm and pressed on his chest. Then, I saw him open his mouth and spit out a grayish-white seal. It was also a seal, but this seal wasn't an artifact. It was Lu Xiang's Celestial Master Seal. The Celestial Master Seal was the symbol of a Celestial Master. When a Celestial Master reached the Celestial Master realm, they would condense such a seal in their body. Depending on their talents, their colors ranged from gray to crystal white. There were 3 types in total. The worst was Broken Crow, which was a Celestial Master Seal that was completely gray. After reaching the Celestial Master realm, it was almost impossible for one to advance further, and they had no chance to condense the Celestial Master's young spirit. The second best was Flawed, which was white with a tinge of gray. Those who condensed this kind of Celestial Master Seal were extremely talented and had a high chance of condensing the young spirit, allowing them to walk further on the path of pursuing the way of heaven. The best was Flawless. This kind of Celestial Master Seal was completely white and flawless. Those who could condense the Flawless Seal could be called a 1-in-a-million genius. Condensing the young spirit was easy. It was rumored that they could even reach a higher realm than the Celestial Master Seal. Apart from these 3 types of Celestial Master Seals, the Death Scripture also recorded another kind of Celestial Master Seal called Perfect. It was colorless and transparent, invisible to the human eye. It had an extremely mysterious function. However, I have never heard of this kind of Celestial Master Seal in reality, and I have never seen it in other metaphysical books, so I don't know if it's true or not. So far, I have only seen the Celestial Master Seal twice. The first time was when the snake spirit turned into a dragon half a month ago. The old Taoist who appeared on Dragon Gate Mountain gave the snake spirit the righteous seal and revealed his Celestial Master Seal. It was completely white and flawless. It was an extremely rare flawless seal. At this moment, Lu Xiang's Celestial Master Seal was the second time. His seal was grayish-white, which was obviously a flawed seal. It could be considered as the second best talent among Celestial Masters. Although it could only be ranked as the second best, in reality, most Celestial Masters were just Broken Crow. It was rare for them to have a flawed seal. This kind of Celestial Master relied on a flawed seal. In the same realm, it was not difficult for one person to deal with several Celestial Masters without a flawed seal. At this moment, Lu Xiang spat out the Celestial Master Seal. It was obvious that he wanted to use the seal's power. Although Zhang Canwen, who was fighting him, had the Celestial Master Seal, he did not have a Celestial Master Seal. Even the weakest Celestial Master with the Shattered Crow Seal would have a huge increase in strength once he summoned his Celestial Master Seal, let alone the more powerful Celestial Master with the incomplete Crow Seal. Although Zhang Canwen had the upper hand in the beginning, did he still have a chance of winning against Lu Xiang's Celestial Master Seal? I stared at Lu Xiang. After his Celestial Master's Seal appeared, the effects were immediate. The blood fog surrounding him was instantly cleared. However, clearing the blood fog wasn't much. Zhang Canwen's true killing move was obviously the white aura that came after. Lu Xiang frowned. He didn't retract the Celestial Master Seal, but slowly moved forward to face the white aura. Just like how it had dispersed the blood fog, the gray Celestial Master Seal still had the effect of dispersing Zhang Canwen's white aura. However, the speed was very slow. The white aura seemed to have the power of decay, as it gently blew on Lu Xiang's Celestial Master Seal. After a dozen breaths, the white aura disappeared, and Lu Xiang's Celestial Master Seal gave off a crisp cracking sound. At the same time, Lu Xiang's 7 orifices started to bleed. He strenuously recalled the Celestial Master Seal. Then, he sat on the ground, his face pale. I was shocked. Zhang Canwen had won. This was unbelievable. However, this wasn't the time to celebrate. Although Zhang Canwen had won, he had used up a lot of energy. He was currently at his weakest. I turned to look at Zhang Canwen worriedly. At that moment, a red light appeared next to Zhang Canwen and shot towards his chest. At this moment, it had already touched his outer clothes. Chapter 359. When I saw that, my eyes almost popped out of their sockets. I didn't care about the Heaven's Masters that were glaring at me and quickly ran to Zhang Canwen's side. When I was in front of him, I saw the injury on his chest. It was similar to the injury that I had caused when I killed Lu Zhenyang in the Metaphysics Association. There was a hole in Zhang Canwen's chest. The only difference was that the scarlet light seemed to have a terrifyingly high temperature. Due to the burning flames, there wasn't any blood flowing out of the wound. There was only a long and narrow black hole. At that moment, Zhang Canwen was still standing, but the aura around him was extremely weak. His face was pale and his eyes couldn't focus as he looked blankly in front of him. My heart tightened. Just as I wanted to ask about his condition, Zhang Canwen's body went limp and he fell to the ground. I quickly took a step forward and extended my hand to catch him. When I looked up, his eyes were tightly shut and he was barely breathing. He had completely fainted. At that moment, an old man in a red robe, who was standing not far away, gently waved his sleeves and calmly said to the crowd, "We're facing a great enemy. Let's not waste time on unimportant people. Fellow Taoists, it's more important to deal with the remnant of the witch tribe." The scarlet light was extremely fast and I couldn't see who it was. I only understood now that it was the red-robed elder that had launched a sneak attack. This person had long and narrow eyebrows. He looked similar to the Han family's Heaven's Master, who was Han Wenan's fourth uncle. I recalled that Han Wenan had said that the Han family had sent 2 Heaven's Masters. They were his fourth uncle and second uncle. This person must be Han Wenan's second uncle. Han Wenan had pretended to get close to me and set up this trap with the help of the Metaphysics Association. Now, the Han family's Heaven's Master had launched a sneak attack on Zhang Canwen. The Han family was really getting stronger with each generation. After the red-robed elder said that, all the Taoist masters from the Metaphysics Association stared at Nan Gong. Leader Gu, who was in the distance, walked out and didn't bother with Nan Gong. Instead, he cupped his hands towards the 3 Taoist masters from Dragon Tiger Mountain who were standing behind us and said, "Thank you Taoist masters for your help. As long as we successfully capture the remnant of the witch race, our Metaphysics Association will remember your kindness." Hearing his words, the Taoist priest standing in the middle smiled. "There's no need to thank us. Don't forget the promise that we made before. As long as we can successfully obtain the key to the sky coffin, Mount Longhu will remember this favor." President Gu smiled as well. The 2 remaining witch tribe members were ordered by the old president of our Metaphysics Society. To us, it's far more important than the key to the heavenly road. Furthermore, the Metaphysics Society already has the key, so there's no need to fight for it. Don't worry, Taoist Zhang. As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his hand. The few Taoist masters from the Metaphysics Association received his order and stepped forward at the same time. In an instant they surrounded Nangong. At the same time, the few Taoists from Mount Longhu also moved forward and surrounded Nangong. I didn't know how strong Nangong was, but from the 10 Taoist masters acting as if they were facing a great enemy, Nangong's cultivation base was extremely strong. Before they could make their move, President Gu walked in front of me. He didn't pay attention to me and instead bent down to check Zhang Canwen's injuries. Then, he took out a black pill and stuffed it into Zhang Canwen's mouth. Then, he gently pinched Zhang Canwen's cheek. The unconscious Zhang Canwen swallowed the pill without moving his throat. After doing that, President Gu heaved a sigh of relief. He strode forward and surrounded Nangong. At this moment, Nangong finally made his move. However, it was strange that he didn't make the first move. Instead, he knelt on the ground and closed his eyes. While I was puzzled, he chanted something that was hard to understand. Right after that, an oppressive feeling appeared in the air. It was as if the air had suddenly become several times heavier, pressing down on people's heads. Although I was dozens of meters away from them, my heart was beating fast. The feeling made me feel like I was about to go crazy. President Gu saw that the situation wasn't good. He swung his long sleeve and ordered, "Attack." As soon as he said that, the Taoist masters of the Metaphysics Association raised their hand. They were either magical tools or talismans. All of them attacked Nangong, who was kneeling on the ground. On the side of Mount Longhu, the Taoist in the Taoist robe didn't say anything. He took the lead and waved the horsetail whisk in his hand, joining the battle. Of course, the two people behind him followed him. The battle of the Taoist masters had officially begun. I lowered my head to look at Zhang Kanwen. After taking the pill that President Gu had given him, his yellowish face had regained some color. It seemed his life wasn't in danger. I calmed down and focused on Nangong. If we wanted to escape from this place, Nangong was our only hope. Only if he could defeat all the Taoist masters would we have a glimmer of hope. Facing the siege of the crowd, Nangong's body didn't move at all, but the ancient incantation in his mouth sped up, and the oppressive feeling in the air became more and more intense. When the blood-red light triggered by the silver talisman in President Gu's hand reached his face first, a colorless shadow suddenly appeared in front of Nangong. It looked like a breeze and wrapped the blood-red light. In a few milliseconds, the blood-red light disappeared into thin air. I was shocked. That was a Heavenly Master's silver talisman. Its power was terrifying, but Nangong had easily destroyed it. What kind of power did he have? Before I could finish sighing with emotion, several attacks from magic tools and talismans arrived at the same time. Nangong still didn't move. Similar to the light-wind phantom from before, a dozen phantoms simultaneously appeared in front of him. Some of them looked like a ball of flame, some looked like a leaf, and there was even one that looked like a brightly colored tiger. After these shadows appeared out of thin air, they charged forward like lightning, blocking all the profound techniques that were attacking him. They were either annihilated or entangled with them. In short, Nangong had easily neutralized the first wave of attack. In the entire process, Nangong did not open his eyes at all. Furthermore, after blocking everyone's attacks, he did not stop chanting. Instead, he seemed to be chanting faster and faster. After a few seconds, several black shadows appeared in front of Nangong, and this time, they were even stranger. Some of them looked like huge rocks, while others looked like a small river. After these shadows appeared, they bypassed the other profound techniques that were still locked in a stalemate, and took the initiative to attack the surrounding people. Nangong still had the strength to counterattack. This time, I suddenly saw the hope of escaping. I stared at Nangong and prayed for him in my heart. It seemed that I was too optimistic. After seeing Nangong's counterattack, Chairman Gu didn't care about the shadows that were getting close to him. Instead, he acted like Nangong and sat cross-legged on the ground. His mouth moved slightly as if he was chanting something. The two heavenly masters beside him acted at the same time. Not only did they block the shadows that were attacking them, they also blocked the shadows that were attacking Chairman Gu. After those phantoms disappeared, a large amount of white mist suddenly appeared above President Gu's head. When the white mist dissipated, a phantom of only a foot long appeared above President Gu's head. From the appearance, this phantom was exactly the same as President Gu. It was also sitting cross-legged with a solemn expression. Looking at this miniature version of Chairman Gu's shadow, I instantly thought of Yen Nantian that I had seen in the corpse sex soul-devouring cave. Although I didn't know why Chairman Gu's shadow was so small, it was the same as Yen Nantian's shadow. It was undoubtedly the Heavenly Master's Yang spirit. After summoning the Yang spirit, Chairman Gu, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, opened his eyes and said to the Heavenly Masters around him, "This battle needs to be finished quickly. Everyone, summon your Heavenly Master seals and use your power to break it." After he gave the order, the Heavenly Masters of the Metaphysics Society withdrew their techniques and patted their chests. Then, they opened their mouths and spat out their heavenly master seals. On the side of Mount Longhu, the 3 Taoist priests didn't summon their heavenly master seals. Instead, just like Chairman Gu, they sat cross-legged on the ground and chanted, summoning their yang spirits. Chapter 360. I have never heard of a yang spirit wielding a sword, but judging from the aura emanating from the yang spirits of these 3 people, they are even stronger than President Gu's yang spirit. No wonder the Metaphysics Association wants to ask the 3 Taoist priests of Longhu Mountain for help. I turned to look at Nangong worriedly. He had the upper hand in the previous battle, and I didn't know what would happen next. While I was thinking, Nangong suddenly stopped chanting. He opened his eyes and stood up from the ground. He turned to look at the 3 Taoists from Longhu Mountain and frowned. Then, he said in a clear voice, "Celestial Master Zhang's Taoist technique is really mysterious. Since the 3 of you came here alone, your yang spirits must have cultivated the 3 Greats sword formation. I'm not your opponent. Let's end today's battle." After saying that, he walked up to President Gu, and the corners of his mouth moved slightly as if he was grinning. Then, he put on a look as if he was waiting for death. I was dumbfounded. Nangong had surrendered. The Metaphysics Association and I were mortal enemies. Han Wennan had concealed himself and gained my trust to capture him today. It was obvious what would happen to him if he fell into the Metaphysics Association's hand. Nangong had surrendered. Even if they were to die here today, it would still be better than surrendering. Was Nangong's brain broken by a door? I looked at him in a daze. I had always felt that I couldn't see through this guy, but today, he had changed my understanding of him. President Gu didn't look happy when he heard what he said. He was just a little surprised. After pondering for a while, he didn't say anything. Instead, he took out a 3-meter-long black rope and handed it to the Celestial Master standing next to him. Then, he smiled at Nangong and said, "Your cultivation base is very strong. President Gu specifically told us how to capture you. Please don't blame him." Although he was smiling, the yang spirit was still sitting on top of his head. He didn't seem to have any intention of withdrawing it. The others were the same. They were experienced cultivators, so they wouldn't make any mistakes at this time. If Nangong wanted to pretend to surrender and launch a sneak attack, it would be a mistake. In fact, Nangong did not have such a thought. He did not even have the slightest bit of hesitation. He nodded with a smile on his face and extended his hands, signaling them to start. The Heavenly Master who was holding the black rope turned to look at President Gu. After the latter nodded his head, the Heavenly Master strode forward and wrapped the black rope around Nangong's thumbs, from his neck to his back, and from his crotch to his front. The last part of the rope was nailed into Nangong's chest without any hesitation. Judging from the position of the black rope, almost all of Nangong's acupoints were sealed. Although he didn't know what it was for, since the Metaphysics Association had prepared such a method, it must be foolproof. Only then did my heart sink. What the hell was that Nangong trying to do? When he said that he wanted to surrender, I still had a glimmer of hope in my heart. I thought that he was plotting something, but now that he was being controlled, even if he really had a plot, he could only hold it in. After the binding was completed, the Celestial Master turned around to leave. However, President Gu stepped forward again with a small vermilion pill in his hand. He walked to Nangong's side and with a flick of his finger, the small pill fell on the ink-colored string. Immediately after, a vermilion color rapidly spread on the string and completely wrapped it up. After that, the string suddenly disappeared, as if it had hidden into Nangong's body. After doing all this, President Gu finally made a hand seal and absorbed the yang spirit into his body. The others also stopped using their Taoist technique. They all looked happy and looked up at Nangong like monkeys. At this time, The Heavenly Master standing in the middle of the three people from Longhu Mountain suddenly asked President Gu, "It's best to kill this remnant of the Wu tribe on the spot. Why does Mr. Li have to take him back? The spring sacrifice is about to begin. If we bring this remnant of the Wu tribe with us, it will be troublesome if something unexpected happens." President Gu stroked his beard and shook his head. "Daoist Zhang, don't worry. Since the president has given us a way to subdue this person, there won't be any problems. As for why we have to take him back, the president has made his decision. It's not something I can criticize." Although he was smiling brightly, there was a hint of displeasure in his words. Hearing this, Taoist Zhang from Longhu Mountain changed the topic. He nodded and said, "It's getting late. We shouldn't stay here any longer. We should hurry back." President Gu agreed. The three Heavenly Masters from Longhu Mountain left first. After they left, President Gu turned around and walked toward me. After Nangong had surrendered, I knew that I couldn't escape. I wasn't afraid, but I felt a little lonely and helpless. I quietly waited for him to come over. The only thing I was glad about was that the Metaphysics Association wouldn't take action directly. They would take me back and hand me over to Mr. Li. It wasn't that I hoped that Mr. Li would let me go. In fact, the more I understood the nature of the battle between the witches, the more I understood the irreconcilable hatred between the witches. As the leader of the Metaphysics Association, it was impossible for Mr. Li to ignore his personal interests. The reason I was glad was that I could live a little longer. After he walked in front of me, I thought that President Gu would immediately take action to capture me. However, he didn't care about me. Instead, he grabbed Zhang Canwen's collar and pulled him away from me. After he lowered his head to check his injuries, he seemed to remember me. He casually waved his hand and said to the person next to him, "Seal his heaven's veins and lock his life spirit. Then, bring him back to the memorial hall." After he said that, he left with Zhang Canwen. Another Heavenly Master immediately walked in front of me and pressed his hand on my chest. I didn't have any power to resist when facing the Heavenly Master. Moreover, my heart was deathly still, so I simply stood still and let him do whatever he wanted to my chest. Unlike when he was dealing with Nangong Gong, the Celestial Master in front of me just patted my chest a few times and tied a strange-looking piece of cloth on my left pinky finger. Then, he impatiently urged me to follow him. We walked out of the room. Just like what President Gu had told me, my heaven's veins were completely sealed. I couldn't sense the witchcraft energy in my body at all. Even my eyesight was much worse than before. Although the Heavenly Master in front of me was holding a flashlight, I couldn't see the path in front of me. I could only blindly follow him and carefully walk forward. Soon, I left the main hall and walked to the entrance of the memorial hall where the bonfire was lit. My eyes could finally see clearly. At the entrance of the memorial hall, there were still the same people sitting cross-legged on guard. I didn't recognize the two people from Mount Longhu. I had met Lu Qinggan from the Metaphysics Society, but we weren't friends. He only glanced at me before shifting his gaze. He didn't talk to me from start to finish. The Taoist from the Longhu Mountain, President Gu, and the others were waiting here. Nangong was also here. After all of us arrived, President Gu counted the number of people and led them into the sacrificial hall. This time, there weren't any guards at the entrance. Lu Qinggan, Han Wennan, and the people from Mount Longhu followed them in. I smiled wryly. It seemed that the people outside were a trap. This place wasn't a place that ordinary people could enter. Only those few powers could enter this place. There was no need to waste manpower to set up guards. However, after thinking about it, I felt that it was natural. At that time, I had been blinded by a leaf. I smiled and didn't regret it. Since it had already come to this, there was no point in regretting. On the way to the memorial hall, Nangong wobbled his way to my side. Although President Gu had used his divine power to bind him, I didn't see any strange phenomenon on his body. He wasn't affected when he walked. He was much more carefree than me. This fellow was really heartless. After walking over, he asked me with a smile, "Why didn't you run away when they were besieging me?" I angrily glared at him. "It's easy for you to say. Zhang Canwen was injured and his life was uncertain. How could I leave him behind? Moreover, you didn't seem to be at a disadvantage when dealing with so many people at the same time. I was thinking to wait and see. If you couldn't hold on any longer, it wouldn't be too late for me to run away. Who would have thought that you would surrender without a fight?" Nangong smiled and spread his hands. "I couldn't beat them. What else could I do but surrender? Didn't you hear Gu Lilai call the Taoist from Mount Longhu as Taoist Zhang? On Mount Longhu, anyone with the surname Zhang is not to be trifled with. Although he isn't the real Celestial Master Zhang, at least he has Celestial Master Zhang's bloodline. Moreover, those three people have cultivated the Yang Spirit tripartite sword formation, which is the special skill of Mount Longhu. If I don't surrender, should I wait for them to chop me into pieces?" Although what he said made sense, his smiling face was inexplicably annoying. I curled my lips. "They're not to be trifled with, but you're not a vegetarian. They have the Yang spirit, don't you?" Nangong was bewildered. The smile on his face disappeared. He shook his head. I don't have the Yang spirit." "No Yang spirit?" I didn't get it. When I was about to ask him again, I suddenly remembered that we cultivated witchcraft energy, which was different from Taoist cultivators. The Yang spirit was a Taoist concept, so it was normal that Nangong didn't have it. I was curious. If witchcraft cultivators didn't have the Yang spirit, wouldn't they be able to defeat Taoist cultivators? I hurried to ask Nangong. Nangong shook his head. The Yang spirit is a kind of power that can be separated from the three souls after cultivating to a certain level. The origin of witchcraft is the same. Our shaman tribe also has something similar, but it's not the Yang spirit. If it's not called the Yang spirit, then what is it? I asked. Nangong suddenly sighed. He looked at me with a strange expression. After a while, he said, "Actually, you've seen it before." I frowned. I didn't understand. He and I were the only two people who cultivated witchcraft energy. He was the only one who had reached the Celestial Master realm. Today was the first time he had shown his cultivation base in front of me. Moreover, he didn't last long before he surrendered. When had I ever seen the supernatural power of the shaman tribe's Celestial Master? Nangong saw that I was confused. He sighed again and spat out two words. Tai Sui. Tai Sui. I didn't get it. I lifted my head to look at him. What do you mean? Tai Sui. The Tai Sui is the Celestial Master's Yang spirit, Nangong said faintly. What? I opened my eyes wide. The Tai Sui is the Celestial Master's Yang spirit? How could it be? The Tai Sui was born from the Star of Fortune. How could it become the Celestial Master's Yang spirit? If it was true, the shamans were too heaven-defying. When Xiao Jin transformed, he could easily kill Yan Nanshan's Yang spirit. Although Yan Nanshan's power hadn't recovered to its peak because he had lost his body, he still had at least 70 to 80% of his power. The Tai Sui wasn't something that the Celestial Master could deal with. How could he compare the two powers that were so different? After a while, I got it. I shook my head at Nangong. It's impossible. You just said that the Yang spirit is a kind of power separated from the three souls. This power comes from one's body. The Tai Sui was born from the Star of Fortune. It's not one's own power. How could it be the Celestial Master's Yang spirit? Chapter 361. After listening to Nangong, I nodded and didn't ask further. Sometimes, words couldn't describe the cultivation process. I had to experience it myself to understand its mysteries. I didn't say anything, but Nangong seemed to have mixed feelings. He sighed and said to me, fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. Everything has its advantages and disadvantages. Although the Tai Sui is strong, it's too difficult for the celestial master's yang spirit to combine his three souls with the Tai Sui. Not to mention that the Tai Sui was nowhere to be found today. Even in ancient times, when the Tai Sui was still occasionally seen, it was extremely difficult to achieve this. Even if there were some who succeeded, most of them used trick. For example, one method was to find someone to occupy the place where the newborn Tai Sui was, imprison the body in the place where the Tai Sui was born a few years in advance, and refine the soul every day in order to obtain the Tai Sui's approval. As for those who could combine their three souls with the Tai Sui, they were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. It was like that in ancient times, so there's no need to mention it now. I nodded. Although I didn't know how difficult it was to combine the three souls with the Tai Sui, I knew how rare the Tai Sui was. A few days ago, I had seen the true dragon veins with my own eyes. I understood that cultivators had an endless need for Tao energy. Under such circumstances, the Tai Sui didn't have a place to live. Whether it was a living Tai Sui or a dead Tai Sui, as long as a cultivator found it, it would become the true dragon veins. I suddenly remembered my doubts about the Tai Sui. At first, I thought that the Tai Sui was born from the 4 stars and that there were only 4 of them in the world. However, as I found more and more corpses of the Tai Sui, I gradually overturned my original idea. Due to Xiao Jin's existence, I speculated that the Tai Sui was born from life and death. Every time the stars moved, the Tai Sui would be born. Then, just like humans, they would grow old, get sick, and die. This speculation perfectly explained what I had seen and heard. However, I didn't know whether it was true or not. At this moment, Nangong mentioned this question, so I hurried to ask him. However, before I asked him, I needed to know whether Nangong knew about Xiao Jin or not. After considering my words, I asked, "You said that I've seen the Tai Sui. What do you mean?" Nangong glanced at me suspiciously. "When we met a few days ago, I asked you about the purpose of this trip. You told me what you saw in the cave in Shenzhen. You told me about the scene where the Tai Sui turned into a real dragon vein. Have you forgotten it so quickly?" I was stunned. Of course, not because I had forgotten what I had said a few days ago. It was because Nangong didn't know about Xiao Jin. All along, the impression that Nangong gave me was that he was omniscient and omnipotent. As long as it was something that happened around me, there wasn't anything that he didn't know. Furthermore, according to what he said, he had secretly followed me for a period of time. How could he not notice Xiao Jin? I see to it. I hesitated and didn't mention Xiao Jin. Instead, I vaguely answered, "Of course, I didn't forget. However, I only saw half of the Tai Sui's body. I'm not sure if it was still the Tai Sui. In fact, I've seen the Tai Sui in other places, but they all looked like giant corpses. Is it possible that the Tai Sui is dead? Are you talking about the Tai Sui of the Yin Corpse sect?" This time, Nangong understood. He smiled and said, "Of course, the Tai Sui isn't dead. What you saw was the Tai Sui's corpse. Although the Tai Sui is magical, it's just a living creature. It's not much different from a human. However, there are very few living Tai Sui. It's very rare to see one. The Tai Sui that died in the ancient times are relatively common. The Tai Sui's corpse hasn't decayed even after thousands of years. That's why there are a lot of Tai Sui's corpses in the world. Of course, this refers to the ancient times. Now, as you've seen, the Tai Sui's corpses have turned into true dragon veins, so they're not common anymore. Let's go back to the previous question. For the heavenly master of the witch tribe, the combination of the 3 souls and the Tai Sui isn't limited to the living Tai Sui. In fact, it's better to use the dead Tai Sui. I nodded. Nangong's words confirmed my speculation. The Tai Sui was alive and dead, just like other ordinary creatures. However, I was still a little puzzled. I asked him, Why is it better to use the dead Tai Sui? Nangong smiled. Take the method I just mentioned. Using the soul to refine the newly born Tai Sui in advance is actually a process to weaken the Tai Sui's soul so that the three souls can combine with the Tai Sui. In fact, it's a last resort. The Heavenly Master doesn't have the strength to resist the living Tai Sui, let alone combine with the three souls. However, the dead Tai Sui's body still has great power, and it doesn't have a soul. The difficulty of combining with the three souls is greatly reduced. Moreover, if it's successful, the Heavenly Master can use his soul to control the Tai Sui's body. It's even more powerful than a living Tai Sui with a damaged soul. I understood now. After thinking for a while, I asked Nangong, since it's not difficult to combine the three souls with the Tai Sui's corpse, and I happen to know where to find the Tai Sui's corpse, do you want to deal with it later? Nangong shook his head. The people of the En Corpse sect are not easy to deal with. Moreover, I don't need it. In fact, I have the Yang God Tai Sui, but it was destroyed for some reason. The Yang God Tai Sui only has one chance in its life. After it was destroyed, the three souls were also seriously injured, and they couldn't combine again. It was destroyed. I rolled my eyes. Even the Yang God Heavenly Master can't destroy the Tai Sui's corpse, right? How could that be? Nangong smiled, but he didn't look sad. He shook his head and said, My Yang God Tai Sui isn't a corpse. It's a living Tai Sui. Moreover, it wasn't destroyed by someone else. I destroyed it myself. As for the reason, it's not convenient for me to tell you now. You should pay more attention to the situation when you condense the Yang God Tai Sui in the future. I didn't say anything for a long time. I couldn't understand why Nangong would destroy his own Yang God Tai Sui. Moreover, it was a living Tai Sui. There were only 4 living Tai Sui in this world. I thought it was a miracle that I had met Xiao Jin. I didn't expect that Nangong would also have a living Tai Sui. Although I was curious, I didn't ask further. Although Nangong had a cheeky face, he had strong principles. If he said it wasn't convenient for me to tell him more, he wouldn't say a word to me. It was useless for me to ask him again. After a moment of silence, I smiled and said, I'm still far from the Heavenly Master realm. Condensing the Yang God is too vague. It's still early. It's late. Nangong shook his head. The method I just mentioned to get the Yang God Tai Sui is real. Although it's rare to find the place where the Tai Sui was born in ancient times, there are ways to do it. For example, the divination sect's inherited magical tool can do it. I didn't understand. After a while, I opened my eyes wide and turned to look at Nangong. I was speechless. It turned out that Nangong had borrowed the divination sect's inherited magical tool in Mount Huang Guanshan for this purpose. Nangong looked at my expression and smirked. Don't be so excited. Even though this method is a shortcut, whether or not you can succeed will depend on your luck. Back then, I had also used this method to obtain the Yang God Celestial Master. I still remember the pain and hardships that I had gone through. When the time comes, don't give up because you can't stand the pain. If you do, I'll die of anger. I opened my mouth but didn't know what to say. Nangong had found me a living Tai Sui. I was wondering why the method he used to condense the Yang God Tai Sui sounded so familiar. It turned out he had experienced it himself. After a long time, I gave him a wry smile and nodded. Don't worry. I can't do anything else, but I can endure hardships. Anyway, the Metaphysics Society has captured us. Our lives are in danger. It's hard to say if we can survive until then. Chapter 362. After listening to Nangong's words, my heart calmed down. My tense mood inexplicably loosened a little. His meaning was clear. Perhaps there was still a chance to turn the situation around. However, I didn't understand. The Metaphysics Society had planned to capture him for a long time. To prevent him from running away, Mr. Li had even told us how to capture him. Although I didn't know the power of the ink rope and the scarlet pill, I knew they weren't ordinary. How could Nangong be so confident in such a dangerous situation? I couldn't help but ask. Nangong shook his head and smiled. He didn't answer my question. He raised his hand and pointed ahead. We've arrived at the sacrificial hall. I lifted my head to see. At the end of the passage I could see a bright, open space. There were lights everywhere, and I could vaguely see the silhouettes of many people. It was strange. From the outside, the sacrificial hall looked similar to the hall where the Metaphysics Society had ambushed us. However, after entering the hall, I found that the passage in front of the door was several times longer than that hall. From the dim lights, I could tell that the interior of the sacrificial hall was unimaginably large. We crossed the distance of 12 meters in just a blink of an eye. Soon, we got out of the passage. The interior of the sacrificial hall was as bright as I had seen it before. I couldn't get used to the darkness for more than 10 hours. I couldn't help but squint. At this moment, the little zombie, who had been following me in silence, suddenly moved a few steps forward. He came next to me and grabbed my arm tightly. It seemed he was afraid of something. When the Metaphysics Society had captured Nangong and me, the little zombie had also been captured. President Gu recognized him at first glance. However, ghouls were rare, so President Gu didn't recognize him at first glance. He thought that he was just an ordinary raised corpse, so he didn't pay much attention to him. He let the little zombie follow me until we reached this place. My heavenly veins and fate spirit were sealed, so I couldn't sense the shaman energy in my body. However, it didn't affect my movements. I patted the little zombie's shoulder and comforted him. However, this time, the little zombie, who had always been obedient, looked even more frightened. He stayed close to me and didn't want to leave my side no matter what I said. Feeling helpless, I could only let him grab my arm and follow the others to move forward. Shortly after, a group of people came to greet me. I lifted my head and was dumbfounded. The people who came were also from the Metaphysics Association. There was Lu Qinggan, who I had seen with Han Wennan standing guard outside the sacrificial hall. There was also Lu Zhenyang, who I had caught a glimpse of but thought I was seeing things. He really didn't die. When I lifted my head to stare at him, Lu Zhenyang's gaze was also on me. He wore a faint sneer and his cold gaze was filled with bone-deep hatred. I met his eyes for a moment, then quickly looked away. Although I couldn't use my cultivation for the time being, I could still see that there was no Dao Qi around Lu Zhenyang's body. It was the same as what I thought when I tried to kill him in the arena of the Metaphysics Association. The Lu clan did save him, but his heaven's veins were completely destroyed and his cultivation was gone. He was now a cripple. There was no difference between being alive and being dead. There were many people in the sacrificial hall. Besides the Metaphysics Association, there were at least 3 other forces. I could easily tell them apart from their clothes. One of them was the people from Mount Longhu that I had seen earlier. There were only 6 of them. 3 of them were the heavenly masters who had besieged us, and 3 of them were rank 6 Taoists at the later stage of glorious consciousness. Besides them, there was another force with a lot of people. There were around a dozen of them. They were similar to the Metaphysics Association. They were also wearing Taoist robes. However, their clothes were different from the Taoists from Mount Longhu. They looked more like secular Taoists. The last group was a group of monks. They had the same number of people as Mount Longhu. There were only 6 of them. They stayed in the corner and didn't look eye-catching. When I had been guarding the stone path, I had only seen the people from the Metaphysics Association and Mount Longhu. As for the other Taoists and monks, I didn't know if they had come in earlier or if they had taken another path. The members of the Metaphysics Society quickly found a place to settle down in the middle of the crowd. Chairman Gu and the others didn't bother with me and let me stay with Nangong Gong and the little zombie. The 7 or 8 Taoist masters gathered together and seemed to be discussing something important. All of them had solemn expressions on their faces. Out of boredom, I raised my eyes and looked around randomly. I didn't know what material the walls of the sacrificial hall were made of. I couldn't see any light source, but this place was as bright as day. The light source obviously came from the walls. However, after looking around for a long time, I didn't see anything like a luminous pearl on the wall. Instead, the whole wall was shining brighter than a luminous pearl. Besides the strange light source, the architecture of the sacrificial hall was also strange. We had entered a door and passed through a long and narrow tunnel. Now there was another door in front of us. There was no door panel on it, only a dark hole. I tried my best to look inside, but I couldn't see anything. In addition to this doorway, there was a round hole on the ground on both sides of the wall. The holes were not big, only about a meter in diameter. However, there was a black aura above the holes, making them look exceptionally strange. While I was carefully observing the surroundings, I suddenly heard a voice. "Zhou-yi, long time no see." I turned around and saw Lu Zhenyang sitting cross-legged next to me. He was looking at me with a gloomy expression. I smiled and turned back, saying softly, "Congratulations, you managed to keep your life." Lu Zhenyang quickly followed up. "Yeah, I'm quite lucky, unlike your parents who died just like that. There's no room for redemption at all." I didn't even turn around. I just shook my head gently and ignored him. His words were indeed vicious, but I didn't need to be angry at a cripple. Lu Zhenyang saw that I didn't reply and suddenly chuckled. "What? You've been caught and you don't even dare to be angry? That's right, you're a remnant of the shaman race. After being caught, I'm afraid you won't be able to live for more than a few days. At this time, you're only worried, right? It's such a pity. I was going to kill you myself." His behavior was strange, as though he was purposely provoking me. Although I didn't know why he was doing that, I was getting impatient. I turned to glance at him and shook my head. "I advise you not to have such wild thoughts in the future. Previously, you've thought about it a few times, but the result was worse and worse. Now that you're a cripple, it's not good for you to have such unrealistic fantasies." Lu Zhenyang's tolerance wasn't as good as before. His eyes instantly turned red when he heard that. He raised his hand and slapped my face. He said in a sharp voice, "So what if I'm a cripple? You're going to be a dead man soon. Even now, your Tianmai is sealed and you can't use the power in your body. What's the difference between you and a cripple?" I chuckled. "The difference is that my body is still at the later stages of glorious memory. Even if I stand here and let you hit me, the one that hurts in the end will be your hand and not my face." "You." Lu Zhenyang was furious. He sat there and panted. He couldn't say a word for a long time. After a while, he spoke again. "I didn't come here to quarrel with you. I want to make a deal with you." I turned and looked at him playfully. I shook my head. "But I don't want to make a deal with you." That fellow's face seemed to have the word conspiracy written all over it. Although I didn't know what he was planning, the current situation was extremely complicated. I didn't want to complicate things further. Lu Zhenyang didn't get angry this time, nor did he open his mouth to speak. Instead, he smiled and lowered his head to write the words Yipiampian on the ground in front of me. I was stunned. Lu Zhenyang continued, "As long as you tell me one thing, I will tell you her exact location. How about it?" I hesitated for a moment before I lifted my head to look at Nangong. He was resting with his eyes closed. He didn't seem to have heard my conversation with Lu Zhenyang. I turned and stared into Lu Zhenyang's eyes. After a few seconds I nodded. "What do you want to know?" Lu Zhenyang lifted his head to look in President Gu's direction. Then, he pointed at the corner on the right where there was no one. He said softly, "There are too many people here. Let's talk over there." Then, he stood up and walked in that direction. I stood up and glanced in President Gu's direction. The Metaphysics Association's heavenly masters were still discussing and no one was paying attention to us. I followed behind Lu Zhenyang. Soon, we reached the side of the pitch-black hole. Lu Zhenyang seemed to be very interested in the hole. He didn't care about the black smoke at the top of the hole. He moved to the side and looked down. I was originally wary of the black smoke, but seeing that he didn't seem to care about it, I thought that it was fine. I walked to his side and asked anxiously, "What do you want to know?" Lu Zhenyang retracted his gaze from the hole in the ground and turned to look at me. He didn't answer my question. Suddenly, he reached out and tore open his shirt, revealing a hole on his chest. He smiled and asked me, "When you used that silver talisman to hurt me, the wound you saw should be different from the one you saw now, right?" I looked up and saw a bowl-sized hole on his left chest. There was a layer of red skin inside the hole, and 2 pieces of his sternum could be seen. Below the sternum, there was a piece of red skin that was pulsating. It was obvious that his heart was under that piece of skin. I didn't say anything. Lu Zhenyang smiled again. "Actually, you had already killed me. Even with my grandfather's cultivation, he wouldn't be able to save a person with a broken heart. It's a pity that God disposes. My heart is in the middle of my chest, and it just happened to miss the silver spear. Haha, God doesn't want me to die so early." I retracted my gaze and shook my head. Living isn't necessarily better than dying. Let's talk about the deal. What do you want to know? All right. Lu Zhenyang nodded and covered the hole on his chest. After arranging his clothes, he moved closer to my ear and said softly, "What I want to know is, what's in this hole?" I was stunned. Before I could react, I suddenly felt a strong numbness at my waist. My body instantly went limp. "Zhou-yi, if I don't kill you personally, how can I be satisfied?" Lu Zhenyang's cold laughter resounded in my ear. Then, I felt someone kick my calf. I instantly lost my balance, and fell forward into the hole that was emitting black smoke. Ha 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 ha, stop. Chapter 363. My descent was extremely quick. In a split second there was no longer any sound or light in my ears. The light that filled my surroundings had now become a small light dot above my head. My heart was filled with annoyance. I had been too careless. I only remembered that Lu Zhenyang's chest had been pierced by me and that he had become a cripple. I had forgotten that my veins of the heavens were also sealed. What was even more unexpected was that Lu Zhenyang had a weapon with him. From the numbness that I felt, it was possible that he had used an electric baton or a high-voltage stun gun. This wouldn't be a problem when my body was full of shaman energy. However, in that situation, it was obvious that I wouldn't be able to withstand it with just my physical strength. I had never suffered a loss when I faced Lu Zhenyang before his cultivation was crippled. I didn't expect that Lu Zhenyang, who was already a cripple, would be able to make me suffer a great loss. This cave was located in the sacrificial hall. It didn't matter if there were any dangers down there. Just the height of the cave was enough to threaten me since my veins of the heavens were sealed. However, the reality was out of my expectations. Just as I realized the danger in my mind, I suddenly stepped on the ground. The tremendous falling force caused my body to crouch down. My chin fiercely knocked against my bent knee, and my teeth instantly broke my lower lip. A fishy and salty taste instantly filled my mouth. However, that was the extent of my injury. I immediately put away the regret in my heart. I didn't stand up and just moved my body. After confirming that there weren't any other injuries, I focused all of my attention on my surroundings. Since it was pitch black in here, I couldn't see anything. I held my breath and concentrated on paying attention to the slightest sound. Lu Zhenyang had spent a lot of effort and had even prepared a weapon in advance. He had used bait and surprise attacks to lure me into this underground cave. He must have been certain that he could kill me before he did so. I didn't believe that there were no other dangers at the bottom of this cave. However, after a full minute, not to mention danger, there was no sound. I slowly got up and took out the flashlight. I carefully touched my back a few times. When I touched a cold stone wall, I took half a step back and leaned my back against it. Then, I turned on the flashlight. The flashlight was a powerful flashlight that Zhang Canwen and I had bought before entering the royal tomb. The moment I turned it on, the bright light filled the entire narrow cave. It was completely different from what I had expected. In this narrow cave, besides me, there was nothing else. It was just a cylindrical cave. I didn't dare to lower my guard. I carefully looked around and found some complicated patterns on the stone walls and the floor. When I got closer to take a closer look, I found that they were carved inscriptions. These patterns looked quite regular, but they were only small and fragmented patterns and could not describe their appearance. Moreover, there was a faint black mist slowly rising from the indentations in the patterns. It was obvious that the black mist at the entrance of the cave came from that. In this place, it was impossible to completely hold one's breath and not breathe in the black mist. Luckily, I had already breathed in a lot of the black mist since I had been tricked by Lu Zhenyang to the entrance of the cave. However, I didn't feel anything strange. It seemed that the black mist wasn't too harmful. I stood up. Since there wasn't any danger here, I prepared to leave. Even though the people from the Metaphysics Association were eyeing me, it was impossible to shake them off by hiding here. Moreover, I couldn't get out of the Yinshang royal tomb by myself. Even if I shook them off, it would be meaningless. I raised my head and looked up. From the light above, the bottom of the cave was about 20 meters from the ground. This distance was just right. With my current 4-star body, I could barely resist it. If I went any deeper, I was afraid that I would have been injured. If I wanted to climb up, it wouldn't be a difficult matter. Although the walls of the cave were very smooth and there weren't any footholds for me to climb, the cave was narrow and only a meter wide. As long as I used my arms and knees to support myself, I would be able to climb up bit by bit and I would be able to get out. With my physical strength, climbing this distance of 20 meters was not a difficult task. After thinking about it, I turned off the flashlight and closed my eyes. I took a deep breath and prepared to climb up in one go. However, when I closed my eyes, I suddenly felt something strange. It wasn't that there was any danger in the surroundings, but that after I closed my eyes, I could see the black mist again. This was very abnormal. I had turned off the flashlight, and the surroundings were pitch black. Let alone the dark energy that had merged with the darkness, even if it was a piece of white paper, I wouldn't be able to see it. Moreover, I had closed my eyes, so how could I see the dark energy? However, I did see it. Perhaps see wasn't the right word to describe it, but I felt as if I had seen it. What was even more strange was that after I opened my eyes, that feeling disappeared. I couldn't see the black mist anymore. What's going on? I tried a few more times, but the feeling didn't disappear. Instead, it became more obvious. I slowly figured out some things in my heart. It was common for cultivators to be able to see something when I closed my eyes but couldn't see it when I opened my eyes. This was because during cultivation, no matter if it was Dao Qi or Shaman Qi, the human eye couldn't see them. They could only feel them. However, when I closed my eyes and meditated to absorb them, I could clearly see them in my mind. From what I could see, when I absorbed the true dragon vein, the true dragon Qi, or Dao Qi, was like some golden smoke floating in the air. It entered my body as I breathed. When I didn't have the true dragon vein, I could sense some grayish-white thin Dao Qi in the air when I meditated and cultivated. On the other hand, the shaman Qi looked different. It was dark green in color. Based on these experiences, this black aura was clearly a type of energy, similar to Shaman Qi and Dao Qi. However, this thick black color was very unfamiliar to me. It was obvious that I had never seen this kind of energy before. I hesitated. It was obvious that I could absorb the black mist. With my heavenly vein being sealed, if the density of the black mist was high enough, it might be helpful to me after I absorbed it. It might even be possible for me to break through the seal of the heavenly vein. After all, sealing the heavenly vein only blocked the connection between the energy inside and outside of the heavenly vein, so that I couldn't use the energy in my body. With the addition of external energy, even the seal that the celestial master had set up couldn't completely stop the internal and external attack. However, I didn't know anything about the black mist. I couldn't predict what would happen after I absorbed it. In fact, there was a compatibility between the human body and various kinds of energy. For example, in the cultivation of metaphysics, some people had talent and some did not. The condition to determine whether one had talent or not was the compatibility between the body and the qi of the way. If the compatibility was high enough, one would be able to absorb enough Tao qi. Hence, one was considered talented. If the compatibility wasn't high enough, forcefully absorbing the Tao qi would only result in one's body collapsing and death. If my heavenly vein wasn't sealed, I could use my shaman qi to suppress the black mist and send it out of my body if I couldn't get a compatibility with it. It wouldn't cause any harm to my body. However, I couldn't use the shaman qi in my heavenly vein. After absorbing the black mist, I couldn't feel the compatibility. If the compatibility wasn't high enough, the black mist would start to destroy my body. I wouldn't be able to use my shaman qi to suppress it. By then, my life might be in danger. While I was hesitating, I closed my eyes again and sensed the black smoke floating in the air. I reached out and gently grabbed a few wisps of it. I felt the black smoke twirling and pulsating in my palm as though it was a living spirit. Suddenly, I thought of the mural that I had seen on the stone path. I thought of the person who looked exactly like me in the mural. I also thought of the Jing ghost in the cave in the orchard in Shenzhen, as well as the strange way the Jing ghost had touched my face. Although I hadn't thought much about it, I knew that the Yinshang Royal Mausoleum was related to me. It was just like the door at the end of the stone path. Zhang Canwen, who had temporarily reached the Celestial Master's realm, couldn't push it open no matter how hard he tried. However, I had opened the door with a gentle touch. It seemed that my luck had always been good here. Since that was the case, it might not be a bad choice to gamble on my luck. Chapter 364. The process of absorbing the black energy was different from any of my previous cultivations. During the entire process, I was fearful of the unknown. I could only sense that I was cultivating from the image of the black energy being absorbed into my body. Apart from that, I knew nothing else. But very quickly, everything became clear because I noticed that the wound on my lower lip caused by my chin hitting my knee was rapidly healing. This strongly proved that after I absorbed the black energy, it didn't destroy my body. Instead, it allowed my body to recover. It also proved that my body was compatible with the black energy. No matter how much the compatibility was, as long as it existed, it meant that the outcome wouldn't be too bad. Thus, I calmed myself down and didn't hesitate to absorb the black energy quickly. Even though the veins of the sky were sealed, I had the cultivation of a 4-star glory, after all. My body was already used to the cultivation speed of a 4-star glory. So, when I absorbed at full speed, a large amount of black energy surged into my body. Not long after, I felt that the seal on my veins of the sky was loosening. I became more and more spirited as I continued to absorb with all my might. Very quickly, the slight loosening became more obvious. From a small dot, it became a small hole. The witchcraft energy in the veins of the sky could easily pass through this small hole. Moreover, when the two powers could communicate, it would be easier for me to break through the seal on the veins of the sky. The small hole became bigger and bigger. In the end, it became a real exit on the seal. The witchcraft energy followed my will, and I could easily control it. However, the seal was still there, so the speed of the witchcraft energy entering and exiting was slightly affected. I roughly felt that based on the current speed of witchcraft energy entering and exiting, the cultivation that I could use was equivalent to when I had just achieved glory of knowledge. That was enough. After all, there wasn't much difference between a 4-star and a 1-star glory of knowledge when facing those masters in the cave. If they wanted to attack me, I could only wait for death. The 1-star glory of knowledge was enough to ensure that I could protect myself in unexpected situations, such as being ambushed by Lu Zhenyang or falling into this cave. Moreover, if I thought about it optimistically, if the masters from the Metaphysics Association were to encounter any trouble in the sacrificial hall, my 1-star glory of knowledge cultivation would be enough to ensure that I could escape at a relatively fast speed. What was even more amazing was that the Celestial Master's seal was still in place. As long as I didn't reveal my cultivation, even a Celestial Master wouldn't be able to tell. At this moment, the seal on the meridian of the heaven and the black aura's attack had reached a balance. There was no benefit in continuing, so I stopped absorbing and returned to my cultivation state. I was very curious. What is this black smoke? Could it be another kind of power other than witch qi and Dao qi? Wasn't this a little too unbelievable? Just the battle of witchcraft alone had lasted since the Shang dynasty until now. If another force were to appear, who knew how chaotic the world would become? There was another point. The shaman qi came from Tai Sui, and the Dao qi came from the true dragon vein transformed from Tai Sui's corpse. These two sources of power had a vein that could be cleansed, but the black qi before them seemed to have appeared out of thin air without any foundation. What was even more unbelievable was that I was extremely talented in both Taoist qi and shaman qi. This was clearly shown during the Young Phoenix gathering. If this black aura was really the third type of power, then, judging from how I was breaking through the heavenly meridian restriction just now, I was also extremely talented in this black aura. This was too much. I tried to study the black smoke after I calmed myself down. When I was absorbing the black smoke, I focused all my attention on attacking the seal on the meridian of the heaven, so I didn't have the time to identify the nature of the black smoke. Only after I stopped absorbing the black smoke did I have the chance to absorb it into the meridian of the heaven to sense its origin. I closed my eyes again. This time, it only took me a few seconds to open them again. I was pleasantly surprised. It was completely different from what I had deduced earlier. The black smoke wasn't a third kind of power, but its origin was the same as witchcraft qi. In other words, the black smoke was actually witchcraft qi, or a purer type of witchcraft qi. I understood. When I first saw witchcraft qi, it was dark green. When the dark green color was extremely thick, it was normal to only see black and not green. Witchcraft qi was the main power of my cultivation. Putting aside the fact that it had helped me break the seal on the meridian of the heaven, after absorbing the black smoke, it would be of great help to my cultivation. Previously, with the help of the Tai Sui's corpse in the cave in Shenzhen, I already had the cultivation of a 4-star glorious consciousness. If I absorbed a large amount of the black smoke, it wouldn't be difficult for me to reach the late stage of glorious consciousness. After all, the black smoke was much thicker than the witchcraft qi on Tai Sui's body. It was just like how the gray Dao qi in the air was different from the golden true dragon qi on the true dragon vein. This black smoke was obviously a power of a higher realm. However, I still didn't understand. The Tai Sui was the source of witchcraft qi, but the witchcraft qi around it was dark green. Where did the black smoke come from? Why was there a power that was closer to the source of witchcraft qi than the Tai Sui? I thought about it, but I didn't find the answer. Furthermore, it wasn't a good time to get to the bottom of it. Very quickly, I tossed these questions to the side. I closed my eyes and quickly absorbed the black smoke. A higher level of power meant that the same amount of power was stored within the same volume. Adding on the fact that I had already absorbed a lot of it, my cultivation didn't last for long. My heaven's veins were filled with black mist, and I couldn't continue cultivating. Of course, I was satisfied with this result. Just by relying on the black smoke that I had stored, I was confident that I could break through to the 6-star glorious consciousness, much less the 5-star glorious consciousness. Of course, all of this could only remain in my imagination. Before the seal on the meridian of the heaven was completely removed, I couldn't convert the black smoke into my own cultivation. At this moment, the power that I could use was still only the 1-star glorious consciousness. Looking at the seemingly inexhaustible black aura that permeated the surroundings, my heart was filled with pity. If only there was something that could store all of this black aura. In the future, I could absorb and use it whenever I wanted. Breaking through to the heavenly master realm would be a piece of cake. As I thought about this, the jade bracelet immediately appeared in my mind. Regardless of whether it was the true dragon energy that I had absorbed from the stone of Mount Tai or the true dragon vein of the Metaphysics Association, they had left a deep impression on me. It was a pity that after I took the jade bracelet out and tried to absorb it, there was no reaction. I didn't know if it was because the jade bracelet didn't have the ability to absorb witchcraft energy, or if it was because of Zhenren Guan's 5 emperor coins that sealed the jade bracelet's absorption ability. In any case, I could only give up and toss this thought to the side. I raised my head and prepared to leave this place. I used my arms to support myself on both sides of the stone wall and climbed upward. After the meridian of the heavens seal was opened, I didn't actually need to use this method. I could easily climb up with just a spell or a talisman. However, in order to hide the fact that I had recovered my cultivation, I had to use this stupid method so that the people from the Metaphysics Association wouldn't be able to see through me. Even so, the recovery of my cultivation made it easier for me to use my physical strength. In just half a minute, I had climbed more than half of the distance and arrived near the entrance of the cave. The moment I was about to climb out of the cave, I heard the voices of the people on the other side of the cave. The first was Lu Ziang's angry voice. He was obviously reprimanding Lu Zhenyang. He scolded loudly, "You evil creature, do you know that this remnant of the shaman tribe is the person the old president wants? If you kill this person and the old president blames you, who will bear the consequences?" Lu Zhenyang's voice followed. He seemed to be very calm and there was a sense of relief in his voice. He replied, "Grandpa, if the old president asks, I will naturally bear the consequences. I have a blood feud with this person. This time, I came here to be a sacrifice. Although I want to pursue that chance, I know that this is a situation where I will definitely die. I have no other wish in this life. The only thing I can't get rid of is the blood feud in my heart. Now that I can kill Zhou Yi with my own hands, I can die without regret. Of course, it would be even better if he doesn't die. When I enter the blood sacrifice cave, I will be able to fight with him again." Yu. Lu Ziang seemed to be angry. After reprimanding him a few times, he sighed. When he spoke again, it was as if he was facing President Gu. "This evil creature still doesn't know how to repent. It's because I didn't teach him well. However, Brother Gu, you heard it too. This child came here to seek death. He only has the thought of revenge left in his heart. There's nothing I can do. If the old president blames me, the Lu family will be at the old president's disposal." After he finished speaking, he seemed to have made up his mind and stopped talking. President Gu's voice sounded very quickly. He did not seem to be angry and instead tried to persuade him, "Brother Lu, you're too serious." Although the old president appreciated this remnant of the shaman tribe before, after his identity was exposed, the old president naturally wouldn't care. The reason why he asked for him by name is because he wants to personally confirm his death. "Brother Lu, you don't have to worry. At that time, all the fellow Taoists here will naturally confirm to the old president that this child is dead. I believe the old president won't blame you anymore." Lu Ziang's grateful voice was immediately heard. If that's the case, I'm extremely grateful. In the future, if Brother Gu has any errands for me, I will definitely. Before he finished speaking, President Gu interrupted him with a smile. Brother Lu, you don't have to say any more. Everyone, get ready. The third door is about to open. The Taoists from Dragon Tiger Mountain are still waiting for us to discuss with them. Let's end this matter here. After he made his decision, everyone seemed to be about to leave. I was surprised as I listened from the side. Why did they think that I was definitely dead? Didn't anyone come down to check? Also, the blood sacrifice cave that Lu Zhenyang mentioned, was he referring to the cave that I was currently in? Also, why did he say that he wanted to be a blood sacrifice? I couldn't figure out these questions. The people from the Metaphysics Association were about to leave, so it was better for me to come out quickly. Thus, I crawled a few steps and jumped out of the cave. Then, I pretended to be weak and took a few deep breaths. Then, I shouted at President Gu and the others, "President, please wait. I'm out." In an instant, everyone stopped in their tracks. They turned around and stared at me as if they had seen a ghost. Especially Lu Zhenyang, he was the first to react. He pointed at me and asked with a trembling voice, "You? That's the blood sacrifice cave. Why aren't you dead yet?" I turned to look at the cave entrance, and blinked before smiling awkwardly. This is just a small cave. It's less than 20 meters deep. It's hard to fall to your death. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.